Sorry, Jeff. Good morning, everyone. We're going to get started. Did somebody pass wind on that side of the room or something? Okay. So to start us off then, health and safety announcement. There was a fire alarm drill anticipated today. It's just happened. So we're not anticipating another one, in which case if the alarm sounds, then please leave the building through the nearest fire exit by following the signs above the doors, make your way to the rear of the car park and wait there until you are told it is safe to return. And finally, please make sure all phones are either muted or switched off. To start the meeting then, good morning everyone and welcome to this Strategic Planning Committee meeting on the 23rd of October 2024. I'm your Chair, Councillor Todd Olive. To my right is Vice Chair, Councillor Mike Howe. Supporting officers present are Ed Freeman, Assistant Director, Planning, Strategy and Development Management, Damien Hunter, Planning Solicitor, and Debbie Meakin, Democratic Services Officer. Can I remind everyone present that this meeting is audio recorded for subsequent publication on the Council's website, so please can members and officers making a contribution to the meeting use a microphone or your comments will not be recorded. We will now start the meeting by doing a roll call of committee members and declaration of interests. Debbie.
Thank you. Good morning, committee. I'll start with you, Chair, if I may, just to check that you are here and if you have any declarations. Thank you.
Last time I checked, I am indeed here and I have no declarations to make.
Thank you. Next to our Vice Chair, Councillor Howe. Good morning.
Good morning. I'm here and no declarations.
Thank you very much. I'll move on to Councillor Colin Brown. Good morning, Colin.
Yes, I'm here also, and no declarations.
Thank you very much. Next to Councillor Davey. Good morning.
Good morning. I'm here and no declarations.
Thank you very much. Moving next to Councillor Paula Fernley. Good morning.
Good morning. I need to declare an effect and prejudicial NRI in relation to the Gypsy and Traveller article report.
Thank you very much. Moving on to Councillor Ingham. Good morning.
Good morning. I'm present and no declarations.
Thank you very much. Next to Councillor Young. Morning, Jeff.
Good morning. Yes, I am here and I need to declare an NRI acceptance prejudicial because I'm a resident of Woodbury Salterton, which is item number, where are we? 7.
Okay, thank you very much. You can turn your mic off, Jeff, that'd be great. Moving on to Councillor Levine, good morning.
Good morning. I'm here and I'm not interesting. Sorry, I mean no declarations.
Thank you very much. And last but by no means least, good morning, Councillor Parr.
Hello, no declarations. I'm here.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair. I can confirm that we're quorate.
Thank you, Debbie. Agenda item 1 then, minutes of the previous meetings held on the 23rd of September and 1st of October 2024. Does anybody have any comments regarding those? Okay, in which case then I'll move from the chair that both of those sets of minutes are true and accurate. The wording is not here, so we'll roll with that. All those in favour, please. And any abstentions? And against? Okay, Jeff just doesn't want to vote, that's fine. That's clearly carried either way then. Agenda item 2, apologies for absence. I have councillors Jess Bailey, Kevin Blakey, Brian Bailey and Bethany Collins. Any others?
I don't have any others, Chair, unless members of the committee do. No, I think that's it, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Agenda item 3, declarations of interest, we've already done. Agenda item 4, public speaking. We have a number of public speakers today, and for the first one, Councillor Peter Faithfull. I believe Debbie has a statement.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, Councillor Faithfull couldn't be here today, but he's provided a statement, which I'll read out as follows. At an earlier meeting, comment was made about the use of highways as a common reason for objecting to sites for housing. While I cannot account for others' comments, my own view is that we are being expected to provide more and more houses with less and less infrastructure. Over a good many years, we have had a continued increase in housing while road classifications have gone down. Historically, the main road network for Ottery has included the B3174, the B3176 and the B3177. The B3174 historically went from the Devon Smithy on the old A30 through Ottery to the Chimeway, Hare and Hounds and on out to the Three Horseshoes on the Sidmouth to Seaton Road. It now ends in Broad Street in Ottery, with the remainder across Gittisham Common having been dropped down to a C-class road. The B3176 used to start at the Merry Harriers on the old A38 and went via Clistheiden, Tallerton, Fairmile, Ottery and Tipton to Sidmouth. This road now goes from the Bowd to Sidmouth Seafront. The B3177 used to go from the junction on the old A30 at the Iron Bridge through Alphington, Ottery and West Hill to join the 3180 Daisy Mount to the halfway house. This road now ends again in Broad Street, Ottery. While I am aware that some residents and possibly councillors seem to want to use issues such as highways to block housing numbers, for me, I would be more inclined to support housing if we were to have the appropriate level of infrastructure. Declassifying roads is clearly the opposite. Unless I am mistaken, declassifying roads means that they will receive less levels of maintenance. As I recall, before the old A30 between Sowton and Honiton was declassified from an A road, substantial resurfacing was done as it was still an A road. If the work had waited until after declassification, the work would not have been to the same level. Improvements to highways have been done in the past, both for vehicle users and pedestrians. It is not impossible. A simple example can be seen in the section of pavement from the mini roundabout at the top of Honiton High Street and the A35. Along the Monckton Road from the roundabout towards the A30, the south side of the road had no pavement. To create a pavement, the front of the gardens was used, with a new wall being built further back from the road. These projects have been done in the past. Why should we expect to accept poor standards in road safety just for the benefit of developers? While I have been describing issues around Ottery, I am sure the same can be applied in other locations across the district. And that's a statement from Councillor Peter Faithful. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Debbie. I appreciate Peter's not here, but perhaps he'd like to write to the Secretary of State and indeed the Devon County Council Cabinet Member for Highways to raise those points. Next up then, I believe we have a statement from Up Ottery Parish Council with regard to item 7. I got one by email yesterday.
Shall we hear from Woodbury first while I find it, Chair? Oh,
Well done, Jeff.
apologies, Chair. Clearly need to be more organised.
I don't think you were copied in, Debbie.
Oh, you've let me off. Thank you very much. Okay, statement from Up Ottery Parish Council. Unfortunately, no members of Up Ottery Parish Council are available to attend the meeting today. Please can read this letter. Okay, the current framework, which relies on the scoring system based on strategic facilities and services and local facilities and services, raises some concerns. The decision to classify settlements, such as sustainable or unsustainable, based on an arbitrary cutoff of 7 out of 18 facilities, may not fully capture the unique strengths and potential of communities like Up Ottery and Woodbury Salterton. The Parish Council would like to highlight a few key points for your consideration. Broadband availability. Up Ottery boasts ultra broadband, one of only 4 settlements to do so. This capability significantly reduces the need for travel and supports remote work, a critical factor in today's world that seems to be overlooked in the current assessment criteria. Next is accessibility to facilities. While it is noted that Up Ottery may lack some facilities, it is important to acknowledge that there is a shop situated within the parish at the A303 services, Yarkham, as well as the thriving community shop in nearby Churchingford, both of which serve residents of Up Ottery. Additionally, a pottery has a primary school, while Dunkeswell, classed as sustainable, does not. Next is community resilience. The local pub, which served as a shop during the COVID-19 restrictions, demonstrates the strong community spirit in a pottery. This resilience is an essential aspect of sustainability that merits recognition. Understanding of strategic facilities. It is worth noting that several settlements classed as sustainable also lack strategic facilities. A more nuanced approach to these classifications could better reflect the characteristics of each community. Next is the importance of growth. While neighbourhood plans and rural exception sites are options for development, it is crucial that all communities, including a pottery, are given opportunities for limited growth. This aligns with recent discussions on strengthening rural economies by allowing more villages to develop appropriately. Next is timing of discussions. A Pottery Parish Council has been advocating for recognition as a service village since the Role and Functions of Settlements report was published. Ensuring timely discussions on this matter would greatly benefit the community. And that is a statement from the parish clerk of a Pottery Parish Council. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Debbie. And on that last point, I would point out this committee has considered a report on this very issue over 2 years ago now in, I want to say, February 2022. Something like that. Ed now says about 3 reports, but there we go. Okay, we then have a representative from Woodbury Parish Council to speak on the same item.
Good morning, Chairman. Good morning, committee. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to the committee this morning. My name is Ken Perry. I'm a Woodbury Parish Councillor, and I've been authorised this morning to read the following statement from Woodbury Parish Council. The statement relates to today's item, agenda item 7, state the settlement hierarchy in respect of Woodbury Salterton. I'm referring to the officer's report attached to today's agenda, pages 33 to 37. Woodbury Parish Council is challenging some of the facts included in that report relating to Woodbury Salterton on the grounds that they are incorrect. We wish to correct those facts and ask this council to reconsider their previous decisions about which tier of the hierarchy Woodbury Salterton should be included in, based on correct facts. The report clauses 2.1 and 2.3 state that Woodbury Salterton has no shop. This is incorrect. There is a significant shopping centre at Greendale Farm, which is located approximately 1,200 metres from the centre of the village as the crow flies, that being the determining criteria. This shop includes butchers, bakers, fishmongers, off-licence, greengrocers, delicatessen departments, not to mention an excellent fish and chip shop, cafe, restaurant and other various fast food outlets, all or part of which would arguably be the envy of many other sustainable communities. The report, clause 2.4, states that Woodbury Salterton lacks facilities such as sports playing pitch and allotment. This fact is also incorrect, as Woodbury Parish Council owns and maintains a large dedicated allotment site in the centre of the village. The site has existed for many years and is well used by village residents, as it includes a number of individual plots of varying sizes, as well as an allotment holder's communal meeting social area and the beginnings of a communal orchard. Woodbury Salterton is a significant community and is recognised as such in the parish constitution, inasmuch that it is designated as a ward and has 3 parish councillors. Woodbury Salterton is a long-established community which has existed for centuries. It has evolved and been self-sufficient and sustainable. It has its own distinct identity. Woodbury Salterton currently has a village pub and a village school, both of which are experiencing long-term viability issues. The village school has a high reputation and is recognised by Ofsted as good. Despite this, pupil numbers
Could I
are
ask you to draw
falling,
to a close, please, Councillor Perry?
and for the last 2 years, the school has been advertising for places at all levels. The pub is also experiencing commercial difficulties. Woodbury Parish Council is not challenging the methodology. Woodbury Parish Council is not asking to lower the threshold, as stated in the report. Woodbury Parish Council is only asking that the methodology be applied to correct facts, not incorrect facts. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Perry. Could you turn your microphone off, please? Thank you. Okay, with that then, we've come to the end of public speaking. So agenda item 5, matters of urgency, there are none.
Councillor Young, is it not this item where you've declared your
That was
interest?
public speaking.
Right, okay. I thought it was in relation to this particular item, though.
No.
Do you want to speak in relation to this item?
Which item is that?
Agenda item 7.
Number
Role
7.
and functions.
Yeah, okay, no worries.
Yeah, we're not there yet. Agenda item 5, matters of urgency, there are none. Agenda item 6, any items to be dealt with after the public have been excluded, there are none. Which brings us then to agenda item 7 on the status of Upottery and Woodbury Salterton in the settlement hierarchy. So I think we ask Ed to make his presentation, then Jeff to speak, and then, yeah, okay. Mr. Freeman.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, members. Yes, so this report's come forward following concerns raised by Upottery and Woodbury Parish Councils through the site selection process that members will be aware has been running for previous 5 meetings, I think it was, and issues have been raised about where the settlements of Upottery and Woodbury Salterton sit in the settlement hierarchy as part of that, because obviously we weren't considering sites in those locations because they're not currently Tier 4 settlements and therefore haven't been assessed as suitable to accommodate development that would be allocated through the local plan. So this report's been directly produced to try and address those concerns and bring these issues to members' attention. Just to start with, though, a quick history lesson on sort of the role and function of settlements document for those members that weren't members of the committee in 2021 and 22 when these issues were first considered. But the role and functions settlements document was approved and agreed by the committee in October 2021. At a subsequent discussion, there was concern raised that perhaps the Tier 4 of the settlement hierarchy should be expanded to include a broader range of settlements. And so in February 22, a report was brought setting out options for doing that, which are set out in paragraph 2.1 of the report. And you'll see one of those options was to include, among others, Upottery and Woodbury Salterton, as they formed part of a tranche of the next most sustainable settlements in terms of the hierarchy. So if we had a Tier 5, Tier 5, I guess, would have been Upottery, Woodbury Salterton, but also Collie Ford and Rockbere, who have a similar level of services and facilities, jobs, and everything else against the criteria. And the committee decided ultimately not to go with that option, or indeed option 2, which was a broader range of settlements for inclusion in Tier 4, opting to retain the previously agreed settlement hierarchy. So I set that out as a sort of just to remind members of the history of all of this. And it's important because we purposely took committee through that process of considering settlement hierarchy at the start of production of the local plan, because it has underpinned all of the work that we've done since then, in terms of the strategy being to focus development in the most sustainable settlements, i.e. those settlements as higher up the tiers, so as possible, And then we focused our assessments around sites at the settlements are identified in the hierarchy. It would pose many challenges if we were to revisit this now, but I appreciate that the issue has been raised and needs to be addressed. So just turning quickly to Oppottery and Woodbury Salterton, obviously acknowledge the comments that have been received from the relevant parish councils, and note that there are indeed shops within the parish, but that's not the criteria that we've used. What we've looked at is, are those services and facilities within the village and readily accessible and safely and conveniently accessible to residents. So having a shop on elsewhere in the parish, but not close to the village itself or within easy access from the village, would not change our assessment of those settlements in terms of where they sit in terms of shops. It's good to hear Oppottery acknowledge that the pub only offered facilities as a shop during the COVID-19 pandemic. We understand that is not ongoing. And so I stand by our assessment that there isn't a shop in the village of Oppottery, neither is there a shop within the village of Woodbury Salterton. They are within the wider parish. And obviously has also been highlighted in terms of Woodbury Salterton that there are no sports playing pitches. I don't think we were aware of the allotments that have been raised by the speaker, but I don't think that changes our assessment of where that settlement should sit within the hierarchy. Other things I'd say is this issue about shops within the parish, if I recall, did come up when the settlement hierarchy was first discussed, but actually in relation to Cliff St George, which Councillor Howe might recall, and its relationship with Darts Farm. So that issue was discussed at that time, and members concluded that Cliff St George should not be included in the hierarchy on the same basis that while Darts Farm is within the parish, it's not within safe and easy walking distance of the village to serve that purpose as a facility for residents. So that principle has already been long since established in terms of this work. The final thing I'd say is that I fear that settlements that are not in the settlement hierarchy kind of see it as slightly perhaps offensive or derogatory to those settlements, and it's certainly not meant to be. It's tiers of settlements based on planning criteria of sustainability and tried to be relatively objective, and it is not preventing development from coming through in settlements that are not within the settlement hierarchy. There is, of course, the neighbourhood planning route, and the intention, as in the current local plan, is to retain in the new local plan the ability for settlements that are not within the settlement hierarchy to still bring forward development through a neighbourhood plan or other community-led initiative to deliver development to meet their local needs. So it's not intended to necessarily prevent development in those wider settlements, but that it should be community-led and to meet the needs of those communities rather than wider housing needs, which is what the local plan is concerning itself with. So the recommendation is to retain the settlement hierarchy as previously agreed and to not include Oppottery and Woodbury Salterton as Tier 4 settlements. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Freeman. I'll come to Councillor Young first, then, before we banish him.
Thank you, Chair. I would like to explain how I see this as ward member for Woodbury and a resident for Woodbury Salterton. Just to make it clear, I am open to other people's views and not yet decided on I'll take this out because I'm leaving the meeting. I'm not going to be voting. The local plan requires various logical steps to be followed to be found safe for an inspector to agree for it to be sound. One of these steps is to decide the role and function of settlements, which were agreed by this committee in October 2021, as Ed says. This followed an earlier explanation in July that year, and a consultation with district councils, councillors and parish and town councils. To now return to this decision that was democratically agreed some years ago, would I believe, and this report says, will be very problematic. Interestingly, I noticed when I viewed these earlier minutes, we were using Zoom meetings because of COVID. However, using the excuse of COVID to consider this one single element would undermine many decisions that we had made in those challenging times. Turning to Woodbury Parish Council request to review the treatment of the village of Woodbury Salterton stems from a comment in the meetings regarding sites with the PC and local council represented in August. During that meeting, the Woodbury representative requested to the committee not to support a specific site. The reply back was, if you do not want that site, then you will need to come up with an alternative. I paraphrase, I can't remember the exact words. Therefore, the PC went off and hurriedly came up with an alternative, but unfortunately in an unsustainable village, which meant that the site had already been rejected. They therefore questioned the decision made in 2021. Accordingly to the last minutes of the Woodbury PC meeting, I quote, "We are only querying the methodology and felt that really EDTC should have asked right at the beginning for all parish town councils to highlight potential development sites, as some sustainable classed villages may require more housing so the school, pub, shop and community survives." So the PC is not suggesting changes to the designation, but simply querying the methodology. I think this paper explains this quite clearly. I really need to stress the next point. There are actually two sites that the parish council already favoured, which were not originally supported by the planners. Only Woodbury 19, Woodbury 14 and Woodbury 20 were recommended originally. Therefore, they have already provided two alternatives, which both now have outline planning permission and promised substantial benefits to the village. So do they actually require an alternative? At that recent meeting, when they were told to come up with an alternative, it was not made clear to the other members that these two sites that the PC favoured had actually changed from red to green in the last 2 years. And that was thanks to the initiatives of the developers and the PC to overcome the early negative restraints listed by the planners. The other consideration to this discussion today is regarding the change to these villages. Were previously explained at public consultations, and we fed that information back. I spoke myself at these drop-in sessions at Woodbury Salterton, Woodbury and Exton, and I explained to residents there which villages had were sustainable and which weren't. To now go back and change that and to then review the possible sites coming forward, obviously is going to take some time, and at this stage in the plan, I don't believe that is would be acceptable. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Young. Would you care to step out for a few? Okay. Members, any questions for Mr. Freeman before we move to debate? No questions? Councillor Ingham? Councillor Brown?
It's working. Right, I'll read out extracts from a planning inspectorate appeal decision at Ottery. It says the main issues are
Is this
whether
a
the
question, Councillor Brown?
Sorry?
Is this a question, Councillor Brown?
No, it's a statement.
Okay, I'm taking questions
All right.
first.
Yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Ingham?
Thank you, Chair. I'm interested by the position we're left in, because we have two parish councils that I am familiar with, have been over the years, articulating the wants, needs, aspirations they feel of their communities, which isn't exactly aligned with the methodology that we've followed so far for this emerging local plan. But what I want to know is, are we that inflexible? Because if we're that inflexible, surely we just stick with the local plan we got and not bother doing another one. I think after 3 years at least, it's right to question it. And I don't think it's right to say, well, we've taken a decision and not to revisit it. We know the rules say, I think it's 6 months. After 6 months, we can do that. So after 3 years, I think it's kosher and acceptable to do so. So I'm quite happy to do that. And I think it's only credible that we should consider the views of those parish councils. I don't think we have to rewrite, the Old Testament in order to accommodate this. I think we merely have to say, well, under the I'm not saying we must do it, but I think it's right. Sure.
Is there a question?
Yes, there is, because I'm saying, why is Mr. Freeman saying that it's black and white and we can't revisit this? We can revisit it if we so desire. And surely we don't have to...
It sort of sounds like you've answered your own question as far as you're concerned, Councillor Ingham.
Well, I want clarification. Where does it say that we can't do this?
I don't think Mr. Freeman has said that we can't do it, but Mr. Freeman.
Thank you, Chair. Well, no, I haven't, because I've brought this report so that you can revisit it. All I'm saying is that the committee made decisions previously which have influenced the work that we've been doing on the local plan since then. The settlement hierarchy is quite fundamental to the strategy of the plan, and where we're focusing development. If members as a committee want to revisit that and revisit decisions that were made in the past, there is a real danger we just go round and round in circles in terms of plan production. In order to progress the plan, certain decisions needed to be fixed early on so that we could then move forward with plan production. I'm not saying you can't revisit this. I'm saying that it presents a number of challenges if you do. If you wanted to put up Ottery and Woodbury Salterton into Tier 4 the settlement hierarchy, then I would respectfully suggest that you should also be including Collie Ford and Rockbeer, because they have equivalent levels of facilities.
But they haven't asked, Chair.
But this is a process based on evidence. The local plan needs to be evidence-based if it's going to be found sound at examination. So if you want to lower the threshold for communities to be in Tier 4, that needs to be done equitably across all of the communities, and those with equivalent facilities included. Otherwise, the work will not be sound. We will not be following the evidence that we've produced, and the plan is then at risk. The other issue is if you do include up Ottery and Woodbury Salterton and or Rockbeer and Collie Ford, we would have to then go and assess the sites that have been put forward in those settlements and bring them to committee to be considered for allocation. And we haven't done that work because they're not within the settlement hierarchy. And that's quite a significant amount of work that would need to be done in what's an increasingly tight timescale if we're going to meet the transitional arrangements under the draft new NPPF. So it does raise challenges in terms of the timetabling of the plan and meeting those deadlines.
Chair, can I come back on that? Because it's quite important we get this, because I'm sorry, on this issue, I think Mr. Freeman must be quite pedantic. I understand he's fighting his corner best he can. But I think it's not necessary, because we have the evidence provided by the parish councils, especially Woodbury, where they question what we've said in the assumptions. And I think we can make exemptions, special circumstance, because...
Again, Councillor Ingham, is this a question?
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Davey, did you have a question?
I do, and it's a short one. Did we consider the availability of broadband? Was that one of the considerations? So I don't remember seeing it in the settlement hierarchy. And also, did we have any criteria about the proximity of a shop? Did we actually say a shop within so many metres? I heard 1,200 metres quoted just now, which would be walking distance, but according to Google Maps, I think you'd have to walk over several fields to achieve that, because that's as the crow flies. And if you are following roads, as I would on a bike, it comes out as more like 2.5 kilometres, which is cyclable. I'd be quite happy to do it. And having been there on Monday, they're fairly quiet roads. But I just wondered whether we had any criteria for the actual closeness of a shop.
Mr. Freeman.
Thank you, Chair. So yes, broadband speeds are all considered in the role and function of settlements document. There's assessment of the speeds in a section of the report. In terms of distances to shops, as far as I'm aware, I think we considered it on the basis of shops within the settlement. So if they were outside of the settlements, it wasn't considered that the settlement had a shop. But I think we have taken a pragmatic approach. Equally, you know, if there's a shop within ready and easy walking distance of the settlement, but in these cases, I don't think they are really. I mean, I think the upholstery one is out on a main road and some distance from the village with no safe walking route. And while I hear what the parish council say about Greendale Farm Shop, I don't think I would want to walk from Woodbury Salterton through to there, certainly not after dark, or it's just not a safe and convenient route. So I don't think we should be counting those as shops within the village, which was the criteria. And I say this issue arose elsewhere. I cited Cliff St George and I think Edford, but equally made the argument about access to Darts Farm shop. But again, it might be close by, but it's not within easy walking distance to provide that day-to-day facility, which is what the criteria was looking at.
Councillor Howe, your question.
Thank you. I'll try and keep this one brief. And I'm sorry to put Mr. Freeman under pressure here, but he hasn't answered it yet. How long a delay do you think would be if we decided to add these 4 villages into a tier 5, if we seem to be so inclined? Are we, as I suspect, at risk of not getting our 19 regulation consultation done in time, and as such having to find another 200 homes per year as a possible outcome?
I think the difficulty in answering that question is it depends how many additional settlements went into a tier that needed to be assessed, and I'd need to look at how many sites were put forward in those locations that needed to then be assessed and brought to the committee. But you have already what is envisaged to be the last session to look at site allocations on the 29th of October with the agenda already published. So we'd be talking about having to convene an additional meeting to consider sites in those locations once that work has been done. The added difficulty in terms of timetabling is obviously we don't know when the new NPPF is going to be published. And while the draft showed a one month post publication of the NPPF to get to Reg 19 stage of planned production, we don't know for certain if that will be the transitional arrangements. And obviously, if we don't know when it's going to be published, we don't know when that 1 month starts. So I would suggest it's certainly putting the timetable very much at risk. As to how much at risk is difficult to say without further assessment and knowing when the NPPF will be published.
Councillor Barlow was wearing questions.
Thank you, Chair. I think I've asked this question before, and I'm sure I know the answer, but just to say, if we finish this section 19, or regulation 19, you said before it is possible to revisit things after that and have another regulation 19. Should we decide to do that in the future, as long as we get over the first initial, this timeline that we're talking about, we have to get to that point. Is that correct?
There is nothing to say that Regulation 19 stage has to be a single consultation? No. So we could. I think what we'd envisaged is that potentially there might be a need for a second Regulation 19 consultation on, for example, the master plan for the second Newtown, which is unlikely to be completed in time, and potentially evidence documents such as the Greater Exeter Transport Study, which is obviously linked to the new community, which is also unlikely to be ready in time. I hadn't necessarily envisaged that it would be to revisit things that have already been discussed and agreed by the committee and already gone into the plan. I mean, in theory you could, but where do you stop? You know, we end up constantly
Wherever the
consulting and
committee
revisiting things.
Councillor Brown, your question.
I have a question, yes. Are you putting shops above schools for these settlements?
We haven't prioritised the infrastructure. The document has a list of strategic facilities and services and local facilities and services, and it doesn't seek to prioritise them necessarily. They are all facilities and services, the local ones at least, that are needed for everyday living is the principle.
Because you put Dunkerswell in as a settlement for 30 houses. There's no school there. The children travel 10 miles away, and there's only one shop.
I think the point is probably that Dunkerswell meets the threshold for inclusion in Tier 4 for other reasons. Am I right, Mr. Freeman?
Scotland Airport, I suppose, that's about it.
Yeah, I mean, I think, as I said at a previous meeting, I know everyone sort of grasped onto the 7 local facilities and services as the threshold, but it is slightly more complicated than that. At the core of this was whether or not the settlement serves the everyday needs of its residents and a wider catchment, which I think Dunkerswell does. Looking at the local facilities and services table in the document, it still has 2, 4, 6, 8 of the services and facilities without a primary school. So even using the 7 as the threshold that people have latched onto, it's still above that. But it was always more complicated than that anyway. There are some settlements in the hierarchy that have slightly less than the 7 because of their close proximity to neighbouring settlements where those services and facilities are available and readily accessible through sustainable means. So it's slightly more complicated than simply saying 7 facilities, or because a settlement hasn't got a primary school, it shouldn't be in the criteria.
Okay, any further questions? No? Okay, in which case we come to debate, and I have Councillor Levine, who's been waiting patiently, and then Councillor Brown.
Councillor Brown, please.
Councillor Brown can go first if you wish, yes.
Very kind of you. Right, I'm going to read out something from the planning inspector, an appeal decision against the refusal by East Devon to let a house be built there. In the appeal decision, he says the main issues are whether the site is suitable location for residential development in respect of access to everyday services and facilities. The site lies outside the built-up area boundary as defined within the East Devon Local Plan 2013 to 2031, adopted in January 2016, the local plan. That's for planning purposes, the site falls within as a countryside location. Paragraph 78 of the National Planning Policy Framework otherwise states that rural housing should be located where it will enhance or maintain the vitality of rural communities. In this regard, a small range of facility services, including a primary school, exist at the village of Upottery to the north of the site. Given the proximity to the development to Upottery, it is reasonable to consider that these facilities and services would see use by future occupants of the proposed development. This could help to sustain these facilities and services, benefiting the broader rural community. The Parish Council has indeed voiced a strong support for the development on this basis. Even in the event that cars were in fact to be used to drop the residents at the nearest bus station, or to access services and facilities in our pottery, the journey would be very short, taking a matter of minutes. Even long journeys to larger settlements would nevertheless be likely, and the level of environmental harm caused would be very modest, particularly when you consider, well, for the reasons outlined above, I conclude that the site will be a suitable location for residential development in respect of access to everyday local services and facilities. That's an appeal that East Devon lost for a building that was to go up there. So if the inspector thinks it's the right place, how can we overrule that?
So the planning inspectorate's always right.
9 times out of 10 years.
I'm sure I could
As
dig
we
up
found
a
today,
pile of decisions of refusals that you've supported at planning that planning inspectors have then overturned. Councillor Brown?
Even today, East Devon have lost 2 appeals.
Yes, we do lose
And
appeals.
we seem to be losing more appeals than we have in the past.
Can I respectfully suggest that's possibly something to do with the quality of some of the decisions that have come out of planning committee recently.
No, that is not the
Having
planning
said that,
committee, that's
Councillor Levine,
that's
please.
one that's gone against planning
Councillor
committee.
Levine, please.
Thank you, Chair. Can I ask your indulgence? I'm in unfamiliar territory. I'm reading a prepared statement instead of ad-libbing. So I may stutter in places. But let me start by saying that I live in the hamlet of Smithard, which is in the parish of Apottery, some 2.5 miles from Apottery village, along the Churchingford Apottery highway. And it's a highway because it's wider than the pony track. Now, I would like to thank Ed for producing this report because I found the exposition very clear and very useful because I didn't take part in the deliberations about the settlements hierarchy in 2022. So I started reading it with great interest, but I winced painfully when I go to section 2.3, where I read that the key missing facility is a shop. And this means that residents have to travel elsewhere to purchase even basic provisions, making them less sustainable places to live. Whoops! This doesn't align with my experience. My pain increased as my eyebrows rose to the top of my forehead when I saw in the conclusion, section 3.1, that since 2022, nothing has changed. That I don't understand. I mean, yes, all right, bricks and mortars are still the same, but the living habits, the shopping habits of the residents have undergone a sea change. This sea change was catalyzed by the experience during the COVID lockdowns. In the lockdowns, we were isolated from the shops. And during those periods, the pub in the Pottery and the community shop in the neighboring village of Churchingford in Somerset jumped into the breach and supplied residents with food items using local volunteers to carry out doorstep deliveries across the 2 parishes of Apottery and Churchingford. The residents took to the service so much that post-COVID they turned to the convenience of supermarket deliveries and online shopping. If I were to be facetious, I'd be telling you that a remake of The Sound of Music would have Julie Andrews singing the Blackdown Hills are alive with the sound of delivery vans. And when you finish groaning, I'll predict that well before 2040, those vans will be replaced by drones. Yes, the convenience of not having to go shopping has won over the residents of Apottery Parish. And that means that a village shop is no longer a key facility in our area. But wait, I can see you are asking, what happens if you run out of a basic item? Don't you need a shop then? Well, not necessarily. Because in my hamlet, in the unlikely event that you do that, we hop over a short distance into Churchingford and we make use of their community larder. The larder has been operating for over 2 years now and works on the principle of take and replace of basic household staples. And it will not be difficult to establish a community larder in the village of Apottery where there is not only a pub but also a phone box going begging. and the larder will be up and running before any residents arrive, new residents arrive. Now I know Councillor Howard God is looking at me. I know he's got a far better insight of retail than I ever hope to have, but I've been struck by the frequent commercials on television by Uber Eats, Deliveroo, Just Eat, tempting viewers of generations X, Y, and Z to use their delivery services for their shopping. And the omnipresence of supermarket delivery vans in urban areas tell me that even the older demographic is drawn to the convenience of a shopping delivery to the doorstep, just like us in the wild countryside. And this trend is going to grow whether our green policies agree with it or not. Now, I might tell you something interesting, that Tesco in the city of Cambridge is experimenting with home deliveries using autonomous small vehicles that look like the Moon and Mars rovers deployed by NASA in space missions. And it's really quite fun watching one of these beasts cross a busy road and get up and down curbs. They got into the national news last year because passers-by had to help them get over icy curbs during the cold weather. Now, we sit here in committee to produce a local plan for Devon for the next 15 years, not the past 15 years. And we need to incorporate developing trends into our decision-making process if we are not to fail our residents. And I'd like to remind you that about a year ago, the committee held a workshop when we brainstormed about how we see the district in 2040. Forward thinking is our mission. Unfortunately, planning regulations are not keeping up with the current shopping habits of the rural population, and to my mind are out of date. So I would like to urge members to look forward strategically, recognize that the role of a village shop in rural areas has been superseded by the march of supermarket deliveries to your doorstep, and the lack of one does not detract from village life or increase car usage. So please, allow the village of Apottery to be raised to Tier 4. In doing so, you will not be telling officers that they have made unsound judgments, but that the shopping environment in the Blackdown Hills is not recognized by planning regulations. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you, Councillor Levine. I'm familiar with those little robots. They tested one of the models for them while I was doing my bachelor's degree at Warwick. Let me tell you, I'm not sure they'd be suitable for our pottery. That said, I have Councillor Howe, then Councillor Ingham.
Thank you very much. First off, I'll actually respond to Councillor Levine to start with. The whole of policy of this is not just about one of those aspects. It's not about shopping on its own. It's about 7 or more, ideally, facilities. It doesn't matter whether there's a school missing or shop missing, provided there is a cumulative amount of facilities within the locality that makes a place sustainable. So the shopping habits, I wouldn't disagree, totally changed. Everything's changing. We all know you don't need a car for shopping, absolutely. But shopping in its own is not unique to any particular community. Now, Councillor Brown and his appeal, it was a single house. That is different from an allocation. And there have been a number of locations. Colleton Raleigh is a good example where an appeal inspector said, this particular location is ideal for one house, not making the settlement a strategic settlement in that respect. So we have had various applications. The appeals today received, only one of them is a house. The others is an extension to a garden. Who the heck cares? And I forget what the other one was, but the one other house is close to the boundary of Seaton. It's not in an unsustainable location miles away from a town or community or anything else. It's in an area we designated as open countryside, and we fought and won appeals before in the same location, but because of government's moving of its lines and targets, I certainly see appeal inspectors are being a bit more soft as well. So they're now branching out a little bit more from the boundaries. But the fundamental issue we have here today is if we're going to change the methodology we're using and create a tier 5, because we can't put them into tier 4, That would mean changing everything if we put them into tier 4. But if we created a tier 5, is we could well miss hitting the government guidelines as they set down. I personally believe we can say no to both communities at this time, carry on with our local plan, and I would hope if the committee wants to put some hook back to say, look at it later. But we have to progress as we are today. Otherwise, 200 homes per year, possibly more than that by the time government works it out, we are going to be in absolute trouble. We're in enough trouble as it is without creating that. And that doesn't change the fact any of these communities can do a neighbourhood plan and do their own allocations, as my village has done. And that's the fundamental big difference. So we have to think really hard what we're doing and try and prepare for that and be ready. I wouldn't disagree with the sentiments made, and Upottery and Woodbury Salted, and if they want communities and facilitate things, absolutely, great, fantastic. Unfortunately, other villages don't. And we've got a real chicken and egg situation there. So please think about what you're doing.
I'm going to break one of my own rules in this instance. Councillor Perry, is Woodbury Parish Council preparing a neighbourhood plan?
Yes, it is.
Okay, thank you. For the record, the answer was yes, as those watching online wouldn't have heard that. Before I come to Councillor Ingham, just conscious that we've had a lot of comments. Mr. Freeman, was there anything you wanted to respond to?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I mean, one thing I would like to know what appeal Councillor Brown is referring to, if we have an application number or something, so that I could look it up, because I'm struggling to find an appeal in recent times in Upottery on our system. So I don't know if you have the application number there.
It's at Norwich, which is Upottery.
So in the parish, but not in the village of Upottery.
It's probably...
Could you use your microphone, please, Colin?
Yes, microphone, please.
It's about 500 yards from the pub.
Okay, do you have an application number or something?
Yeah. I've got an appeal number. You should be able to trace it from there.
Okay, what's the appeal number?
Appeal number is
Appeal inspection.
APP U1105 W19 323 4774.
Okay, well, Todd's doing. I think the other point Councillor Levine made was about deliveries. I mean, I take the point that deliveries have a role in terms of giving people access to shops remotely, in effect. But I think it's quite one thing to have sort of a weekly shop delivered by a supermarket or something, but your local shop in the village is there and used by most people where they've run out of bread or milk or something essential at the last minute. So it's serving a different role, and I think it would be highly unsustainable for us to be relying on delivery services to just deliver a pint of milk when you've run out of milk in the morning for your breakfast cereal or whatever, which is why I think it's still important for communities to have a shop. If we're going to add to those communities and say that they are sustainable places to put additional growth that's meeting wider housing needs than just the needs of that community, which is effectively what we're saying when we make something a tier 4 settlement. Because in any community through a neighbourhood plan, as Councillor Howard said, can through a neighbourhood plan enable small scale residential development to meet its own needs as a community and justify why that's sustainable for the needs of that community. We're making a tier 4 settlement by saying it's sustainable for wider housing needs to be met there. And I don't think it is if people are entirely reliant on deliveries to bring them a pint of milk in the morning, for example. So I think we need to be careful.
Councillor Brown, you've still got your microphone on.
Another application as well for that area.
I'm going to go round others who are waiting to speak first, Colin, and then I will come back to you if that's all right.
I can give you a couple of other examples of properties that have been approved.
I'm going to go round first, and we'll let Mr. Freeman actually look at this one first. So I have Councillor Ingham, then Davey, then Levine, then Brown.
Chair, it's interesting what you learn at committee. I didn't know that Yehudi lived at Smeethart. I lived probably about 20 years ago, 200 yards away from probably where he did, on the ridge there, on the highway you spoke of. The reason I'm so concerned about both villages, because I know them, and Up Ottery, it's spread out, but it has a vibrant community. And just to remind you that in the last plan, we stepped out to make sure that they had affordable housing delivered next to their school. You may remember Colin, just there. And that was pushed forward. We got there, we used that. So that was a great help to that community, maybe 15 years ago when that started to be lobbied for. And a similar, with Sages Lee at Woodbury Salterton. And to say that Woodbury Salterton is not sustainable, well, bear in mind the name of the pub is the Diggers, and the Diggers were a movement during the Civil War. So they seem to be surviving quite well, even despite our interventions or the lack of. I'm scared that we're going to move away from this and say we're not prepared to adjust because we have to rubber stamp the current emerging local plan. And I think we all appreciate that. But we must make some sort of commitment not to be dogmatic in our attitude towards communities that actually question what we're doing and say, we want to take part, give us that opportunity. And because we've rushed this through so quickly, and because of the methodology we did use, we didn't engage at the same depth with smaller communities, then villages like Up Ottery and Woodbury Salterton can get left behind. I don't think we should be doing that, Chair. For a matter of fact, if you think about shops at Woodbury Salterton, we need to get our facts right. And if you drive from the centre of Woodbury Salterton village to Greendale, yes, it's one hell of a journey. But if you use the cycle path that nips up in a straight line from pretty much from the Diggers going up to the back of the vaccination centre and to the past the vaccination centre and the shops, it's very quick to get there. I know because I've done it. It's a good route. So I'd say that's about half the distance. And is Greendale just another small hamlet or village shop? I don't think it is. I think it's quite good. So you've got to balance the differences out within different communities and to realise that perhaps when you want to pop out for that odd pint of milk, you can actually spend a fortune at Greendale because they've got absolutely everything. If you chose to, and you can walk there. I only say these things, Chair, not because I want us to take a firm decision today to revisit these things and hold up the emerging local plan. But what we have got to do is listen when people talk to us. Otherwise, just stop listening to them completely, because there's absolutely nothing worse than someone asking you for your opinion and then it being dismissed. If you don't want to listen to people, don't invite engagement. And that's why I think we ought to make a commitment, if we can, Chair, I think as Councillor House said, that we will definitely revisit this at an appropriate time to see what, and be proactive in our engagement with those 4 settlements to make sure we're not missing a trick on their behalf. Thank you, Chair.
I take slight issue with some of what you've just said there, Councillor Ingham. The reason we're having this discussion today is because we've heard the points from Woodbury Parish and from Up Ottery Parish, and we've asked Mr. Freeman to bring a further report on the issues for us to discuss it. It's also not really as an authority our role to be acting, in my view, in quite flagrant contradiction of our spatial strategy, to make exceptions which, in my view, and with respect to what we've heard today, don't change the situation. If these communities want to bring forwards these sites, they have power to do that themselves. They can do a neighbourhood plan, they can do a community right to build order, they can do a neighbourhood development order, they can do a community land trust. There are loads of ways that they could do it. There's government funded support out there to help them do it. This is not the only way. As Mr. Freeman has said, this is about the district's housing need. If there are specific circumstances in individual communities, then there are ways for them to pick that up. The other thing that I just wanted to mention before I go through the rest of my list, looking at a map, and I'll be corrected if this is wrong, but on a quick count, I don't think there can be any more than 50 or 60 houses in Up Ottery village itself. From what I can see on a map, it is in the actual village itself. Parish may be different, but looking at these satellite images, I don't think it can be much larger than that.
I know because I delivered leaflets there. May 2024.
Can you give me a different number then, Yehudi?
I think it's far more like 80 than.
Oh, okay, so it's okay, fine. So I'll okay, fine. So 100 doors, let's call it. I don't think it undermines the point I was about to make. A couple of weeks ago, we discussed Plymtree, where we had one recommended allocation for 30 houses. Plymtree is about 150 dwellings. We decided 30 was too much in Plymtree. We said, no, you can have no more than 15. We're now looking at a settlement that's even smaller than that, that doesn't meet the threshold that we've set out in our spatial strategy to be considered a sustainable location for development. And we're saying, no, we should be thinking about this again. And as far as I can tell, the argument for that in the case of Woodbury Salterton is that on a nice sunny day, when there's not been rain for a couple of weeks, you could walk up the cycle path to Greendale, which is not in the village and therefore doesn't qualify under the methodology that we've set out. And in the case of Up Ottery, you could order a Tesco delivery next week if you can get a slot. Because I don't think Uber Eats deliver to Up Ottery somehow. This turned into slightly more of a intervention than I expected it to be when I started. But I've heard nothing today so far that makes me think the methodology is wrong, that we need a tier 5 or that Up Ottery and Woodbury Salterton should be in tier 4. There we go. Having said that, Mr. Freeman, have you had a chance to look at the appeal decision?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I've scanned, read it. I think there are a couple of things to say in response. I think one key consideration is this wasn't a new build house, it was a barn conversion. Our own policies are much more flexible about sustainability criteria when it comes to barn conversions, because converting an existing building that's redundant is inherently sustainable as a thing to do, given all of the embedded carbon within that building. So our own policies take account of that, and I think this appeal relates to the fairly early years of this now adopted local plan, where we were finding our feet in terms of where the balance lay in terms of how flexible to be in terms of sustainability criteria and access to services and facilities when it came to barn conversions. I think the inspector actually sums it up quite well in paragraph 16 of the appeal decision, where he says the development would see reuse of a dilapidated building whose condition has an appreciably adverse effect on its residential setting. There is no obvious alternative use for the building which would have a lesser impact. I think that sums it up quite well. In those circumstances, they've considered it to be a sustainable location. I don't think you can construe, or I wouldn't construe from that decision, that one inspector's decision, that they are saying that Up Ottery is a sustainable location to build new housing.
Thank you, Mr. Freeman. Coming through the rest of my list then, I have Councillor Davey, who's not spoken yet.
Thank you, Chair. It's ironic, isn't it? There's quite a few places would actually like to be classified as unsustainable, including my hometown of Exmouth, where I'm constantly being told the schools are full, the infrastructure's creaking, it's not sustainable. And yesterday we had the residents of West Hill doing their very best to convince us that that there was absolutely no way that West Hill should be classed as a sustainable place. I have sometimes thought, with the advent of home working and home deliveries and so on, that maybe we needed to rethink the way we look at sustainability in the countryside. But the fact is, most people don't want to be confined to their homes. And if I look at the ways I see cars being used, I would say number one is employment. Even people, and many of our own staff, work from home part of the time, but the rest of the time they're travelling to work. So you only have to go on the A376 between 7 and 9 in the morning, or 4 and 6, or I'd say 4 and 7 in the evening, to see the increase in traffic that employment generates. And we know from our own statistics that a lot of people travel to work in Exeter. So I think when we class a place as unsustainable, we need to look at employment. I would say another major driver of car use is schools. A lot of people drop their kids off at school by car. And where I live, it's about 5 minutes walk to local school along a nice, safe path. My area suddenly fills up with cars at 9 o'clock in the morning and 3 o'clock in the afternoon, when people are dropping their kids off and picking them up again. So I know that a lot of people are using cars for the school run. Dog walking generates a surprising amount of car use. And then there's shopping, because yes, I take Councillor Levine's point, and possibly if I lived in a small village, I'd use home deliveries more. I'm lucky, I've got a supermarket within about a 5 to 10 minute walk from where I live. But still, if you go up to Tesco or Lidl in Exmouth, you realise that a lot of people still drive to go and do their shopping. So I think car use is still going to depend on the availability of local services. And actually, one of my biggest car use is leisure and social. And I often think maybe that's true for most people. But I don't work, well, I'm here today. I should say driving to council meetings is my major car use. But beyond that, I would say if I wasn't a councillor, I was just a retired person, it would be leisure, going to visit people, going to various activities, going to various cultural events. That's my main car use. So I think, basically what I'm trying to say is I think the methodology is pretty sound. And I think it's been suggested, I think by Councillor Ingham, that there was a kind of judgment call made. No, it isn't. It's a numbers game. It is purely, do we have 8 or 7, is it? 7 or 8 of the main facilities available in the settlement? And that's the criterion. It's not a kind of judgment call by officers. And finally, and a point's been made already, the fact that village is classed as unsustainable doesn't preclude some kind of development taking place there. So I think probably you should be careful what you wish for.
Well put, Councillor Davey. Councillor Parr, as you've not spoken yet.
Thank you. Yes, leading on from what's just been said, I'd like to know more about this paragraph 2.5, where the report says that not being in Tier 4 doesn't preclude development. And are there really only two ways of getting development, which are this community-led development in a neighbourhood plan or an exception site? Because it's quite easy to say to communities, do a neighbourhood plan. We all know they cost a huge amount of money. I know there's a lot of grant funding, but they take enormous length of time and huge input. So it's really a very big ask for communities, small communities. So are there any other ways that there could be development if these small communities wanted?
Through Chair, yes, there are. I think in hindsight, the wording of that sentence should probably be through community-led development, including a neighbourhood plan or rural exception site. But there are other means. Local development orders don't require a neighbourhood plan necessarily, so you could just do a local development order. You could set up a community land trust, as has been done in Collerton, to deliver housing. There are other means. I mean, you don't even need to do all of those if you make a case, make a planning application and make a good case as to why those homes are needed in that community. They can be allowed as a departure from policy if the planning committee are supportive of that. So it doesn't have to be through a neighbourhood plan, which I appreciate is a time-consuming and costly process, although we do what we can to support and help that, and there is government monies available to help communities as well. So that there are multiple means of doing that, and as I think as Councillor Davey has said, being in a Tier 4 settlement may not be all it's cracked up to be for some communities who then realise that actually you get unsolicited planning applications for developments that they perhaps don't want within their community that we are then unable to resist because they're compliant with policy. So there is an element to be careful what you wish for here as well, I think.
Thank you, Mr. Freeman. Okay, we're going to come back around then through the list that I have here, and I have Councillor Levine, then Councillor Brown, then Councillor Howe.
Thank you, Chair. One answer to Mr. Freeman, the pint of milk, you find it in the community larder because there's such a thing as long life milk. And to be honest with you, one of the reason why I came up with my diatribe was because there's such emphasis in this report about shopping, key element. So what I did before I even composed my reaction, I did an unscientific market research. I went, while my car was being serviced in the garage in Dunkeswell, I sat outside the village shop with a cup of coffee for 5 hours, and I had a look at who went in and out of the shop to buy. There were no bottles of milk coming out, but there were a lot of workmen going in and out, getting their breakfast and getting their lunch. Most residents, and there were few that I talked to, said to me, what, go to the village shop? Haven't you heard about the cost of living crisis? It's expensive. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Levine. Sitting outside the shop for 5 hours sounds like great fun, I'm sure. Councillor Brown.
I'll just correct Mr. Freeman on his a barn conversion. It was a new build barn conversion with an annex that was approved, if you look it up. But you've also given permission for Underdown Farm for the farmhouse, which was an 8-bedroom farmhouse, and I know because I used to own it at one time. That was given permission to be converted, even though it was listed, into 2 4-bedroom houses. But irrespective of that, you've got quite a large employer in Upper Ottery, well, not Upper Ottery, in Lappet, which is about 250 yards away from the pub there. You've got Otter Brewery that supplies beer, well, not only everywhere in East Devon, everywhere around the world. I mean, I've been in Gibraltar and been out to buy pints of it. So, it is a large operating brewery there, which surely must make it sustainable. Thank you.
That is quite a trek over the hill from Up Ottery to Luppet.
It's 150 yards up the hill from the pub. From that pub, if you're sober and you can manage it, you'll walk up the hill and get there. It's a pony track.
Okay, I'm going to keep going through my list. I've got you, Councillor Ingham, but you are after Councillor Howe.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, we're going round in houses, yeah, exactly that. We are concentrating on Up Ottery and Woodbury Salterton. But quite literally, if we create this fifth tier, we've also got to consider Rockbeer and Colleton Raleigh, who will be Collyford, who will be pulled into this without their consultation, without their ambitions recognised, because we can't do we'll let you because we feel good for you or anything else, would be so much easier if it was all done by villages coming forward saying, we'll take so much. That's not the situation we're in. We've got to assess it individually, work out and get out policies as best we can for the communities and the likelihood going forward. We have a policy, we've agreed it 3 times, Mr. Freeman says. I can certainly remember twice. We've argued many times on it. We are where we are, and I'm going to move the recommendation as it stands, because we need to get on and finish this and get this done. Whether these communities want to come back later, they certainly can have development. We're not saying no to development. There are many routes available for them to let them do that, and I hope they do move neighbourhood plans. But we need to get on. So happy to recommend, Sir Chair.
Okay, before I come to Councillor Ingham then, do we have a seconder? Councillor Davey, do you wish to say anything at that point? No? Okay. Councillor Ingham then.
Thank you, Chair. Just adding on, settlements can be very different. I'm minded to recollect that when I lived at Up Ottery, I was outside, I wasn't one of the 80 or 100 houses there, up on the top ridge nearer to Smeathall. There was a village shop there that I'm sure no longer exists at Smeathall, that was handed over to their daughter. But what I used to go there had been a farm shop on the road between where I lived and Up Ottery that lasted 5 years and then went, the little farm shop. But quite often, I say this for the benefit of the townies, I used to say to my other half at that time, I'm just popping across to Dunkeswell. I'm just popping across to the shop at Dunkeswell. It's about 7 or 8 miles, but there's a different degree of sustainability that you have to recognise if you live out in a rural area, that everything is not at your doorstep. But it's so helpful when a council like this endeavours to provide an extra help up towards sustainability to make sure those rural communities work, like, Woodbury Salterton, like Churchingford, as well as Up Ottery, and several more. So that's why I would have been happy to support a delay and a revisit on this, but I'm not going to support we ignore this, because our duty, I believe, as councillors, is not only to support national government in executing their housing delivery over the next 20 years, is also to make sure that our communities remain vibrant and sustainable by our definition, so that they're villages and hamlets, as well as towns and cities, that are worth living in and adjacent to. So I'm disappointed that we've decided to go for a proposal that just recognises the report without saying there is something we could do at a later date potentially for villages, but in actual fact it will probably only be 2. And I think that's a shame.
Picking up on those comments then, Councillor Ingham, to take what you're suggesting to its logical conclusion then, we should be going to every village of Woodbury, Salterns and Up Ottery's size, and we should be saying, no, but in planning terms, that's the logical conclusion of what you're saying. We cannot, just because Woodbury and Up Ottery have popped up and said, yes, we'd like some, we cannot just say, oh yeah, okay, fine. That's not a planning reason to do it. If we're going to do it for Woodbury Salterton, if we're going to do it for Up Ottery, along the lines of you suggest, then we have to do it in other places as well. And I can absolutely, you do. For this plan to be found sound, you have to do it in other places as well. Planning law does not work on arbitrary exceptions. It just doesn't. As much as planning committee might like to act, it does sometimes. It does not. Does anybody else want to speak on this item?
I think it's a flawed methodology.
Councillor Fernley.
Thank you. I've listened to all the arguments for and against, and I have to say I sit with the chair and the vice chair. It would be good to revisit at some point, but for what we're having to go through at the moment, I think we need to move on with it. So I support it.
Before we come to a vote, then, for the benefit of the tape and Councillor Perry sat in the corner, please, if you want this, do a neighbourhood plan, please, because that's the way to get it done. Or a neighbourhood development order, or a community right to build order, or a community land trust, whatever it is. Councillor Levine?
Chair, could I ask you to help me out with my parish councils by writing to them and pointing out to them that this is the case, because they don't believe me when I come to the meetings and tell them.
Let's take that offline then, Councillor Levine. But point taken, heard, and certainly willing to help where I can. And perhaps we can get Angela King involved there too. With that said then, we have a proposal as written in the report, seconded by Councillor Davey. Are you happy for us to go to a vote? Okay, all those in favour then, please. That's 4. Those against? 3, and those abstaining. That's 1. Okay, I thought that might come down to my first casting vote then for a minute. So that proposal is carried, which brings us to the end of that item. We've been going for an hour and a half now, so we're going to take a 10-minute break until 22:12.
Councillor Young back.
Okay, folks, we'll get started again, and we're going to move on to item 8, a report on provision for gypsy and traveller accommodation. Mr. Freeman.
Thank you, Chair. So this report is to bring to members' attention that we have a new gypsy and traveller accommodation assessment report completed as evidence for the new local plan, and the findings of it are summarised in the report. There's obviously a little bit of context setting at the start of the report, and important to note that the needs identified in the previous gypsy and traveller accommodation assessment went largely unmet because of difficulties of identifying and bringing forward sites, which members will hopefully be aware of from previous reports. Interestingly, this new assessment has identified a similar level of need to that in the previous report, which is summarised largely in paragraph 2.3 in terms of permanent provision. There is an ongoing need for transit provision, but that does require some closer working between the district councils and the county council about how we can deliver temporary or negotiated stopping places to deal with that demand, and that's something we clearly need to take forward in partnership with those bodies. So the report summarises the need. So you'll see there's 20 pitches for households that meet the planning definition, up to 8 pitches for undetermined households and 4 pitches for households that do not meet the strict planning definition, but we are recognising as cultural gypsies or travellers because we feel we need to do that. There is still some slight uncertainty about how these definitions should be applied, so we're taking a pragmatic approach and being on the safe side. So for this plan, the proposal in terms of how we meet that need, obviously we've got the 15 pitches that are proposed and secured at Cranbrook in the Cranbrook plan, and now have outline consent in the applications for the Cobdens and Shrewsbury expansion areas at Cranbrook. And there's been earlier reports through this committee and through Cabinet about how those might come forward. We're also looking in this plan to allocate in the second new community, which we think could provide a similar number, so 15 pitches there as well, potentially coming forward in this plan period to meet the need. And then obviously there's the site at Langerton Lane the members considered a few meetings ago for an allocation for gypsy and traveller pitches as well. So we think between those allocations and bricks and mortar housing provision that's coming forward in the plan as part of the general housing need, that those needs are met. There's also reference to paragraph 3.6 to travelling show people sites. The assessment identifies that there are sufficient plots because of a consent for 9 plots at Cliff St Mary. It may be that those additional plots probably aren't going to come forward, it would appear, but there is a consent there that could still be implemented that meets that need. So there's some legitimacy to considering that, but obviously there may be a risk of additional need that can't be met by that site that leads to planning applications in the future that we may need to deal with. But it's a bit harder, I think, to predict the need of travelling show people in terms of that. So I think those are the headlines from the report. So members are asked to agree that the gypsy and traveller accommodation assessment be used as basis for calculating need in the publication draft local plan and the findings of the study. And 2, note that the identified need will be met through the previously agreed allocations as set out in section 3 of the report. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Freeman. I meant to note when we resumed, but just for members' awareness, we do not have lunch today. I won't say anything else. Questions on this report? Oh, sorry, yes, Councillor Fernley, thank you for reminding me. If you have anything you want to say before you leave.
Well, having read the report, I do really agree with recommendations. But I would like to ask some questions in the choice of the recent allocation. I draw your attention to paragraph 2.6, where the public sector equality duty is mentioned. This states that some persons may be treated more favourably than others by permitting them to live in areas which would not usually be allowed. How has the public sector equality duty been adhered to in the allocation of Langerton Lane when the site has a noise level not acceptable to East Devon planners for bricks and mortar, but now seems acceptable for people living in caravans. According to paragraph 3.3, this site can be delivered in the short term. Please can you tell me the mechanism and how this will be funded? One of the requirements for a traveller site is good access and no flooding. The road to this site is narrow, a green lane and floods, as does part of the site. Is this really the best we can offer for our travelling community?
Thank you, Councillor Fernley. Before you go, Mr Hunter, are you happy for Mr Freeman to answer those questions before Paula leaves, or does she need to leave now?
If you pass them, yeah, she can hear the answers, yeah.
Okay. If you'd like to stay and hear the answers.
Thank you, Chair. So, I mean, in terms of noise levels, I know there are concerns about noise in relation to the motorway noise and the railway line. Not suggesting that gypsy and traveller pitches should come forward and be overly harmed by noise from those sources, and obviously measures would need to be taken in terms of the design of that site to mitigate those noise levels. But in allocating the site, I think the advice we've had from environmental health is that it's achievable. Obviously, if it's not, then it wouldn't be able to come forward. It wouldn't satisfy the criteria in terms of planning application. But I think I said at the meeting when the site was looked at, it is lower than the sources of the noise, particularly the motorway, which helps in terms of mitigation and noise levels. So I think the advice we had was that that can be addressed, but acknowledged that there would be works needed to achieve that. In terms of flooding, yes, there are parts of the site that flood, but there was a significant element of the site and central part of the site that is not affected by flooding, which is where we would envisage the pitches being accommodated. Obviously wouldn't want to put gypsy and traveller pitches in areas which are significantly at risk of flooding. And in terms of the delivery mechanisms, fundamentally the site was put forward through the call for sites with gypsy and traveller pitches as one of the potential uses. So as things stand, it would be for the owner to bring that forward. Obviously, the ownership of the site may change. I believe the site is currently on the market, and if that changes, we would need to take up how the site is delivered with the new owner. And obviously, that is a risk in allocating the site if a new owner of the site doesn't want to pursue gypsy and traveller pitches at the site, which would be unfortunate given that it's really the only site that was put forward for that purpose. But we can only work on the information we've got from the owner that put the site forward at the time. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Mr Freeman. See you soon, Paula.
Yeah.
Okay. Questions for Mr Freeman then? Bless you. Question, Councillor Young?
It is a question. I know of some other traveller sites around, and they seem to have come forward from a owner of the land coming forward and placing caravans on it through a planning application. That won't stop, will it? This is allocated through the local plan, and then there are others that might come through, just like windfalls with housing. Yeah.
Yes, as mentioned at paragraph 3.7 of the report, we will no doubt still get windfall applications coming forward, and we'll need to consider those in the context of the need at the time. As discussion about the Langerton Lane sites indicated, its delivery is by no means certain. So if we get windfall applications coming forward and for whatever reason it hasn't delivered, and we may need to seriously consider a windfall site, or there may be specific needs that the sites that we're allocating don't meet that mean windfall sites might still be appropriate. But I'm confident that we're in a strong position with the allocations that we've got, that we can prove to an inspector examination that we are meeting the need as identified.
Any other questions? Councillor Ingham?
I feel what Mr Freeman has said is exactly right when we consider where we were as a council maybe 10, 12 years ago to now. It's radically different, so well done to the team for doing this report. I think it's spot on.
Councillor Davey.
I think we kind of know what we mean by this, but is there actually a definition of gypsies and travellers? If someone wants to establish a site, how do we decide these people are genuine gypsies and travellers? What are the criteria?
Yes, Rita, I don't have the definition to hand, but there is a special planning practice guidance note on gypsy and traveller provision, which includes a definition. The report alludes to there being a sort of planning definition and a more sort of a wider definition about cultural gypsies and travellers, but fundamentally it encompasses groups that travel and live in mobile accommodation and travel on a frequent basis. I think the difference between the sort of planning definition and the cultural gypsies or travellers is the planning definition is those that actively travel, as opposed to those that may travel less frequently or have retired from travelling, but still culturally gypsies and travellers who don't want to live in bricks and mortar accommodation, despite the fact that because of health issues or other reasons they're unable or do not travel anymore. So we've perhaps taken a slightly more pragmatic approach to that in the sense that we feel we should be meeting those needs as well, really, and for sort of belt and braces in terms of soundness of the plan, it's probably real wise to do so, I think.
Councillor Ingham?
Can I propose the recommendations, Chair?
You can in a second, yes, when I've just checked to see if there's any further questions. No, okay, in which case we'll take Councillor Ingham's proposal of the recommendations as written. Who would like to second that? Councillor Levine, any wish to say anything? No, any other comments on this report? No. Okay, Councillor Ingham's proposed the recommendations as written then, seconded by Councillor Levine. All those in favour? That's unanimous. Shall we bring Paula back in? No. Okay, with that then we come to agenda item 9, redrafting of chapters 8, 9 and 15 of the local plan. Mr Freeman. Sorry, Councillor Ingham.
So just a supplementary, Chair, to what you said. Are we going to do it chapter by chapter? Yes, please. And can we take this one steady? This is really important to get these right. That's it. Yeah.
Mr Freeman.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So as with at the previous meeting, you have essentially 3 chapters that have been redrafted that we're asking members to review today. First of which is chapter 8, meeting housing needs for all. So this chapter, you'll see from the current report, has been quite significantly redrafted since you would have last seen it. We have sought to edit down quite considerably some of the presentation and policies within it and simplify some of the text. We're mindful that at consultation it was quite a long and detailed chapter that I think some people found quite difficult to read and understand. So there's that. If I just pick out a couple, there's obviously list of paragraph 3.3 of the main changes within the plan, but if I just pick a couple of those out to draw members' attention to, obviously a key one and a potential risk to be aware of is the removal of first homes from the policy on affordable housing. So this is an interesting one where it's slightly in limbo in terms of first homes because obviously we're pursuing a plan under the proposed transitional arrangements for the NPPF, which means the plan would be examined under the December 2023 version of the NPPF, which includes reference to first homes and requirements about the delivery of first homes, which was obviously the policy of the previous government. It doesn't appear that this government are pursuing first homes as a model for affordable housing, and the new NPPF, as drafted and consulted on, sort of removes reference to them and puts more emphasis on social rented affordable housing. So taking that into account and the fact that generally the market and developers don't want to deliver first homes anyway, we have we're recommending that we remove reference to first homes from the plan. That is a risk in terms of how that might be viewed, given that the plan is to be examined under the old NPPF. But equally, we think inspectors will have to have regard to emerging government policy and ministerial statements since then as well. So they're going to have two lots of conflicting guidance to guide themselves through. So the feelings we have are that we obviously think that greater emphasis on social rented housing will better meet the needs of the district than the first homes do. And so we're recommending that we take that approach. We feel, having had an advisory meeting with a planning inspector last week, that is a safe approach to take. In terms of other changes, I guess the other main thing to be aware of is obviously there are a number of gaps in the policies, I think, where it refers to things like the percentage of affordable housing sought and the percentage of other particular housing types sought. Members will be aware we have a session set up with the working group to look at viability issues next week. I'm trying to remember. And then a meeting in November to look at viability issues. So obviously those percentages and thresholds and things in this chapter will be informed by those discussions, and so they've been left blank for the moment so that those discussions can be had and they can be inserted into the text. So I wasn't proposing today that we get into a discussion about what percentage of affordable housing, for example, we're seeking. That would be for a future meeting once you've got that information in front of you. The other thing to draw attention to, which may be controversial, is the removal of the policy that was specifying a mix of housing types in terms of bedroom sizes. The reason for that is that the local housing needs assessment indicates that the need is actually for 75% of new homes to be 3 bedrooms or bigger. When I think when that policy was discussed by the committee previously, we were wanting to use it to secure a mix of housing types that delivered more smaller homes that would be designed more to meet the needs of young people, single person and 2-person households, etc. But as we've already discussed today, the plan needs to be evidence-led, and the evidence suggests that that isn't actually the need, that the need is more for larger homes. So it felt a bit like we would be having a policy that was slightly contrary to what we were trying to achieve. And potentially would encourage developers to deliver more larger homes than we actually get at the moment. And therefore it would be slightly counterintuitive to have a policy like that when we don't need to have that policy. So we've sought to remove that policy from the plan for those reasons. Interested to hear members' views on that, but would emphasise the need for all policies to be evidenced and evidence-led. I think those are the key things I'd draw attention to. There are no doubt others I've missed, but suggest we move through the plan, and happy to answer any questions as we go through the chapter.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Freeman. Questions? Councillor Levine and then Councillor Ingham.
Simple thing. In Appendix A, in the meeting houses needs, there seem to be an awful lot of X's. Numbers that haven't been filled in. What is the position on those X's?
Yes, so those are the percentage requirements and thresholds and things I was referring to that are subject to viability testing. So we'll be bringing a report to a future meeting about the viability testing of the plan and what can be achieved, and then we'll be able to fix those thresholds and percentages informed by that evidence on viability. At this point in time, we don't have the evidence to fill in those blanks, basically. So the X's are blanks to be filled in later. Just at this point, asking members' views on the wording of the policy that sort of fits around those numbers.
So just to be absolutely clear, the local plan working group is meeting Monday afternoon, to which all members, I think, have been invited, and will be taking a brief from the consultants who are looking at viability on the kind of different scenarios and trade-offs that we're going to have to consider. And then there will be a paper which is planned, I think, provisionally for the 22nd of November meeting, which will be asking members to actually take those decisions, which I think I highlighted in my email to all members a couple of weeks ago. So that's why those numbers are missing. Councillor Ingham then.
Thank you, Chair. There's two things I'd ask Mr. Freeman to do. One is to give a bit more meat on the bones for what he was saying about, you know, the need for 3 and 4 bedroom houses. And he'll understand my concern in a minute. So I want him to do that. And I also want him to tell me why I'm wrong, what I'm just about to say, because previously we've identified a need to build houses, flats with smaller numbers of bedrooms, so that as a family grows older and children go and live in Surbiton or wherever with their new jobs, and mum and dad are left in the 3 or 4 bedroom house, they can then, when they come near to retirement, downsize, get some more cash for their pension, and then that frees up the 3 or 4 bedroom house. So I'm a bit concerned on what Mr. Freeman said, because I'm hoping he does still consider what I've just said, unless he thinks that's wrong. And I want to hear exactly that evidence-based requirement for 3 or 4 houses. Where did it come from? Just the consultation?
Why Surbiton, Councillor Ingham?
Could be anywhere. Unfortunately, generations move away from here, you know, to go to university, and sadly, very few of them come back, which is a great shame.
Mr. Freeman.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I mean, I would certainly agree with your understanding that anecdotally, that would be my understanding, is that a lot of families, as you say, younger people move away because they go off to university or for work, can't find work or can't afford housing in this location, and tend to move back later in life when those circumstances have changed, and that can leave a lot of under-occupied homes in the district. So certainly anecdotally, that was our understanding. You will be aware we did a local housing needs assessment. It was done by a consultancy called ORS that examines the housing needs of the district, and that has shown a greater need for 3 and 4 bedroom houses. Now, obviously, that need is not just from the resident population, but also those migrating to this part of the country, and that may well be skewing that, because obviously anecdotally we're concerned with the needs of the resident population, whereas that's also looking at the needs of those that might migrate to East Devon from other parts of the country, which is where I think there's that slight disconnect between our understanding of those issues and what a needs assessment is actually showing us in terms of evidence. What I would say in terms of addressing those issues is that the policies in this chapter do talk about housing for retired people and different stages of life, and hopefully through those policies we can start to address those under-occupied properties and provide housing types that are more suited for those that are perhaps later in life and find themselves living either on their own or as a couple in a large family home, to then downsize and free up that housing stock through the policies that are in the plan. But we felt that having the policy we had before, which was basically setting out percentages of 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom, 3 bedroom, 4 bedroom houses that we wanted to see, that when we filled in the percentages based on the local housing needs assessment, we saw that actually it was heavily weighted towards 3 and 4 bedroom houses, and that didn't seem to be what anecdotally we felt the resident population need, and that by having that policy we could potentially be skewing things actually further away from the 1 or 2 bedroom houses than we get at the moment by not having a policy that prescribes that, and therefore it was perhaps better not to have that policy. and rely on other policies in the plan about retirement housing, adaptable and accessible homes and things like that to deliver that range of housing types for the residents' older population, in the hope that that then enables them to downsize and free up the existing housing stock to meet that need. So hopefully that makes sense. But happy to pick that up again as we go through.
Did you want to come back, Councillor Ian? Okay, thank you. Councillor Davey, then Councillor Young.
Thank you, Chair. Just 3 questions. How do we define housing for younger people? To me, it's all to do with cost, and only with cost. As a young person trying to buy a house, I needed accommodation for a small child at that time, but I had an aspiration for a garden. So I think we need to be careful about how we define housing for younger people as perhaps just being flats. That's my first concern. And I do feel it's all to do with price. I couldn't see any reference to an affordable percentage in or outside settlements. Are we abandoning that? At the moment is 25% within a built-up area boundary, which I know we're changing as a settlement boundary, and 50% if it's deemed to be in the open countryside. Are we not retaining that criterion? And finally, in HMOs, there's no mention of fire safety. Is that because it's covered by building regs? That's it.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, I certainly agree in terms of housing for younger people that that covers a broad range of needs from young single people through to couples and young families, and it's important we deliver a mix of housing that meets all of those needs. I think it's always difficult in terms of how you control that through the planning process. To some extent, it's down to market forces. You would have thought if there's adequate need, the market would seek to provide for that. So it's a challenging one in terms of policy, and perhaps as we go through the policies, we can think through how we are delivering that, and if there's anything else we can do to try and deliver for that group in particular. But I think it is a range, and it's not just apartments or HMOs. It is obviously small family housing as well. Yeah, I mean, I think that's where the cost comes into play, and where this is the danger is even if you deliver those smaller homes, even if you're delivering them, if they're at a cost that young people can't afford, then you still can't meet that need, because there's a more fundamental problem of the disconnect between salaries and house prices in the district, with house prices I think currently standing at just under 10 times the average salary. So the average young person, even if you built them a 2-bedroom house, it wouldn't necessarily be affordable to them. So that's a more fundamental problem that we're grappling with. In terms of affordable percentages in and outside settlements, you're quite right, we have different percentages inside settlement boundaries to outside settlement boundaries as things stand. I think again that comes back to the viability assessment and whether or not the viability modelling and the scenarios we'll be looking at in the workshop on Monday and then in the subsequent committee meetings show a different viability profile for sites that are within settlement boundaries and outside settlement boundaries. But yes, logically, I think there is some merit in perhaps continuing that approach in terms of the percentage outside settlement boundaries, on the basis that land values should logically be lower. If a development is coming forward outside of where we've allocated for development, then the hope value in terms of that land should be lower, and therefore it should be able to support a higher percentage of affordable housing if it is coming forward, aside from our policy. But I think that's a good one to pick up with the consultants when we look at the viability testing. But you're right, that would need changing in terms of the wording in the policy if we were to do that. In terms of HMOs, yes, I think you're right. We wouldn't look to duplicate other legislation, whether that's health and safety or building regulations. So fire safety standards are not things we should be covering in planning policy.
Thank you, Mr. Freeman. Councillor Young.
Thank you, Chair. Going back to this survey, it hasn't given us the answer that we expected, and I wouldn't want to sort of say, well, right, let's go for another survey and see if we get the right answer this time. But who was asked? How many people were asked? And did we actually ask people that are already residents here, who are already got a two-bedroom house and they now want to move on? Because the people that we're expecting to move into the one-bedroom houses probably aren't here yet. They're still at university or still doing their A-levels. So I think we need to take a little pinch of salt and see what national statistics will might give us a little bit of a suggested slight tweaking of the numbers, because it doesn't ring true, because everywhere I speak to, people are saying, oh, we haven't got enough small houses, and now we're being told, no, that's wrong, we need more big houses.
And just on that last point, to clarify, it's not so much a survey as a modelling exercise based on demographic change of those moving to the district, the demographics of the district, and all of that, rather than necessarily going out and asking people. And I don't think it's necessarily wrong or disagreeing with what we think. I think it's just reflecting the fact that the housing need for the district is partly made up of people moving to the district from other parts of the country, and as we know, those tend to be people generally from middle age onwards who are in a financial position where they can afford a larger home in the district, and so that's then showing in the modelling, because it's just extrapolating existing trends forward. So I don't think it's that it's wrong or that we're wrong in terms of our understanding of local housing needs. It's how we reconcile the two, because the evidence is inevitably picking up that trend of people moving to the district, and that's where perhaps local housing needs assessments are needed in some locations to identify more specifically the needs of the local population. And you'll see in terms of some of the policies, we try to look at how we can weave in more local-based housing needs assessments in, so that they can inform the mix of housing on sites.
Councillor Ingham, then Councillor Howe.
Thank you, Chair. At the moment in this debate, the more I hear, the more concerned I'm getting.
We're not in debate yet, Councillor Ingham.
But the point being that from what Mr. Freeman's just said, the prevalence is that we're following the market rather than the local need with regards to housing type, because people want to come and live here, but that's not our major concern. Our major concern is the affordability and accessibility to especially young couples or young individuals being able to rent affordably or purchase affordably. And this comes back to the percentages. For example, very bad numbers, but say if we've got an annual supply requirement of 1,000 houses, to hit 50% affordability, if you were to increase that to 80% demand for affordability, suddenly you probably only need 850 houses per annum, not 1,000 to meet your need, not the want of the market, but to meet the need. And so I just remind members that it's really important, in my opinion, that we really push for the affordable percentage to be as high as possible, because the net effect of that is after 5 or 10 years. Sorry, are you going to ask me the question?
Yes, I am.
Sorry, we're still on questions?
We are,
Oh,
yes.
shut up. Sorry.
I did say, but that's okay. I think you'll probably find a lot of sympathy. Councillor Howe, questions?
Yep, I'll try and make it the last question. The housing survey you're talking about is a East Devon wide survey and doesn't pick out the differences between our towns and our open countryside, shall we say, on our allocations. Is that your understanding?
Yes, that's exactly what I was going to say in response to Councillor Ingham's question. Had we got to a question? Was that I think the flaw in this is that the local housing assessment is a district-wide assessment. So it's not going to pick up the specific needs of specific communities that may well be as we anecdotally think they are. Well, I'm sure they are. So it is how we pick that up. And there are hooks within the policies, and we perhaps need to look at this as we go through, as I suggest. But I mean, for example, the first strategic policy, HN01, some of the wording talks about proposals for housing development will be supported where they broaden choice and reflect and respond to existing and future needs as identified in the local housing needs assessment or successor documents in an up-to-date local housing need evidence assessments. So it's trying to put in a hook that if communities through their neighbourhood planning process do local housing needs assessments, that developers should have regard to that in designing their schemes and the mix of housing they put in their sites. And I think we're increasingly getting suggestions through neighbourhood planning work that even some of the towns where they're looking to review their neighbourhood plans, they're looking at doing local housing needs assessments for their community to understand the needs of the community so that that can inform developments coming forward in that location. So I think as long as we've got hooks in the plan that link to that emerging evidence, if that comes through local neighbourhood planning or other means, that, you know, we may want to do more localised housing needs assessment work ourselves. As long as we have hooks in the plan that mean that the outcomes of those surveys can inform the housing mix on sites coming forward in those communities, then we would hopefully achieve the outcomes that we're wanting to. But the evidence we've got so far is district-wide, as Councillor Howe says. It's not location-specific.
Are there any further questions, or do we want to have an argument about this? Okay, we'll move into debate then. Councillor Ingham, did you want to finish off?
An argument, please. Yes, please. No. Part of the problem is why it's so important to get the highest affordable percentages, because if over a 10-year period you have 1,000 acres that you're going to develop, if you use up that land for the wrong houses in the right place, it means you're going to have to come back and allocate the right houses in the wrong place because you didn't have enough of the right houses in your plan. And that's why, for me, it's imperative that we're trying to hit something like, in my opinion, if possible, especially in a new town, 65 to 70%, where we can plan that in so we get it right, rather than having houses built and misused by a couple buying it because they can afford it for 4 bedrooms, and then grandchildren coming down at Christmas only, or bad analogy, but you know what I'm getting at. And I think it's interesting, Mr. Freeman said about, you know, that income house price ratio at 10 to 1. Well, I know in East Devon it used to be 12 to 1, so it's moving in the right direction. But that's another reason, and it's taken a long time, that's another reason for having the smaller houses so that young couples are tempted to, for example, if they want to buy a property, to do that in their 20s and not save up to buy a 4-bedroom one in their 40s and have wasted all that money that they could have gone into buying their own property chair. It's these things that I think we have to bear in mind when we when we look at this to say, are we actually making it easier for people living and working in East Devon to stay in East Devon? And we should check that on all of this, and hopefully we get that right, Chair.
Did you have any kind of specific suggestions for any of the policies in this chapter?
Well, I was concerned, I am concerned about this preferential 3 to 4 bedroom houses. I'm not convinced we're reading the evidence correctly. I hear what Mr. Freeman says. I hope he's right. I'm not convinced because we're moving away from what we've believed. If he can convince me, that's great.
Councillor Howe?
Right, well, I haven't got the answer to the problem, but nevertheless, I'm going to go with the problem. And it is HN01, the strategic policy I'm querying, and it's in relation to what Mr. Freeman has kindly said just a few minutes before, with a lot of hope and and no firm things. I have no problem with the actual assessment. I think the majority of people moving here, living here, actually do want 3 and 4 beds. They usually have 2 kids and all the rest of it. So I can see an awful lot of need for that. But I also know, and Exmouth, I suppose, is the closest community to me that I know very well, there is a real demand for 1-bed flats and everything else down there that is critical. And we as a community, we as a council has not been able to deliver. I've read this and I keep reading HN01 and following what you've said, Mr. Freeman, I am still left here thinking we are at the whims of the developer. And that's the issue. We need something that ties it down more to the communities we're talking about, particularly the towns, where we will get the smaller accommodation we need desperately for these people. And I'm struggling with it. I keep reading it. It's a lovely few set of words, but I'm just not seeing the ambition. And picking up on Councillor Ingham's point, I get what he's saying. I'd love to support it, but the issue is it's down to viability. If the viability doesn't work, we're not going to get anything. So it's got to be viable. And then from that viability, we've got to demand what we can. So it's a mixed bag. But the policy I've got problems with, but I don't know what the answer is.
So setting aside the question of the specific percentage, which would be for that November meeting, Mr. Freeman, picking up on these concerns, and I think I speak for everyone else on committee when I say probably concerns that we share, although maybe I need to declare an interest, Damien, as I'm also a young person. But Mr. Freeman, what's your suggestion here?
Well, I think, as we've said, I guess the issue is we have to follow the evidence in production of the plan. The evidence is a district-wide housing needs assessment, and so it's influenced by wider needs than just those within the community. The only thing I can think to do is we could take it away and look at how we can strengthen strategic policy HN01 to link the requirements in terms of the mix of housing on any given site to more local-based housing needs assessments as they're produced and come forward. And then we may need to pick this up more broadly about how those are produced. And it may be that some come forward through neighbourhood planning routes, or it may be that we need to undertake some more detailed work on local housing needs to link to that, and put that into some kind of supplementary planning document on design of residential developments that can then feed those documents in. Happy to take that way as an action and see how we can strengthen the plan in terms of those issues, because I realise that's a key concern and a key issue that we need to get right.
We happy with that, and obviously we see this again when it comes back to us for sign off for Reg 19. So we'll take that away as an action. Okay. Any other comments on this chapter then? No. Is it worth mentioning the you know what I'm referring to? Is it do we want to talk about that?
Well, I think we know that issues have been raised in terms of rural exception sites and the use of, this is what you're referring to?
Yes.
And whether or not we should use data held in terms of local, the Devon Home Choice data on housing needs. And so that's been raised again in terms of the rural exception site policy that you've got in front of you, which I'm just trying to find. So you've had you've had a public speaker a number of times at these meetings arguing that we should have regard to housing needs that are on our housing register for affordable housing when looking at rural exception sites. And I've generally responded and said that that data is quite different in terms of it's quite difficult to nail down specific needs that would meet the criteria for rural exception site, which should be specifically housing needs that need to be met in that community for people that have a local connection to that community, or they work in that community, have family in that community, caring for people in that community. And it's difficult to use the data within our housing list, which is through the Devon Home Choice system, to identify those needs. I have had some further conversations with colleagues in housing about that. There remain issues with trying to identify people within that system. I believe it's only in the last couple of years that it's sought details about specific locations where people need to live. Otherwise, it's just previously just been a general list where people register their need as being within the district rather than in a given location. So the data for specific locations is not complete. And then there are issues with the banding of needs within that. So there are, I think it's 5 different bandings. The lowest tier of that is people that have registered on the system but don't actually have a housing need as we would define it. And then the next tier above that is people that have a recognised housing need but are financially able to meet their own need. So if we just use the data, we'd be taking into account people in those categories as well, when those aren't people that we would usually say have a need that must be met through a rural exception site. But I think the conclusion we've come to is that it may be possible to use some of that data in some occasions, so we shouldn't necessarily rule it out. But we didn't want to put in the policy that we would use Devon Home Choice data because it opens us up to using all of that data, and it would need some significant refinement and analysis to be able to use it. So I'm trying to find the policy, but I think the wording in the... Thank you.
Page 20 of that paper.
So I think it now refers to other sources of information. Yes, so point 2 provides the site must provide affordable housing meeting proven unmet need of the local community evidenced by the latest East Devon Local Housing Needs Assessment, housing needs surveys or other local data. And then it uses the examples of neighbourhood plan, parish survey or parish plan. What I'm suggesting is we currently have an affordable housing supplementary planning document which is linked to the adopted local plan. That will need to be updated subsequent to adoption of, well, hopefully adoption of this local plan. And as part of updating that, we could include some text about how we might use Devon Home Choice data to help to inform needs in relation to rural exception sites where it's appropriate, and then set out the circumstances where that might be appropriate and how we would use the data that's held. But I'm still not comfortable from what I've heard from housing colleagues about specifically referring to Devon Home Choice data because of these different bandings that it includes and the data not being complete in terms of locational requirements for everybody. That if we say we're going to use it, we could be held to ransom by it. So if people trying to justify that there's a much greater need in specific locations than there actually is because of that data. So I think it's safer to leave it as a general wording about other local data that could be used, and then we can expand on that through a supplementary planning document.
Thank you, Mr. Freeman. I'd be happy with that. I have Councillor Ingham, then Councillor Young.
Thank you, Chair. In an age of inclusivity, I think it's important to recognise that Mr. Freeman explained it very well there, the need, and those bands that we recognise. And as you go lower down, or perhaps yours isn't a need, it's an aspiration or a want. But if you're in a frozen circumstance, for example, you're single, and did you know you're going to be single for the next 40 years? You're always not going to be in that list. And is that a reasonable thing not to recognise the need of those individuals at the lower tiers, because they can sleep on the couch of their grandparents, let them still do that, because it's not a need to do anything different, it's just a want. And do you see what I'm saying? Is that there can be situations in different villages and towns as well, where we're not actually recognising the needs of working people in that location. And guess what they do? They go and join their brothers and sisters in Surbiton, Chair. And they go up there, because when they spent the weekend up there, they thought, crikey, life's too difficult down here. I can earn more money and I don't have to sleep on the couch. That's a bad example, but do you see, that's why I'm quite keen that we drill down more, and it's so important that that data, as Mr. Freeman said, is really accurate. It has to be accurate, otherwise it's worthless. But then we can genuinely start meeting the needs of our communities, which we certainly haven't done to that degree so far. And that's down to accuracy of data.
Any points to pick on there, Mr. Freeman?
Well, just to add to what I said earlier, I mean, I think this is part of the reason the policy is currently, the policy in the adopted local plan is only linked to local housing needs assessments, so that it's a specific assessment carried out in that parish to identify needs within that parish. And what it does as a result is it's not just picking up affordable housing needs in that parish. It might also pick up people that are living at home with parents but could actually afford a small home. And then it's shaping what's coming forward on that rural exception site, not just in terms of the affordable housing, but also in terms of the market housing that would come forward to say, okay, there's a young person living at home with their parents, but they could afford a 2-bedroom house in this location if one was built. And then hopefully through the design of the rural exception site, we can secure that 2-bedroom house, knowing that there's someone that wants it, even if it's at a market value. So that's the other aspect of this, that those rural exception sites, to my mind, are not just about delivering the affordable housing component, the at least 2/3 that should be affordable, but it's also shaping what's delivered in terms of the market housing, so that is hopefully also meeting a local need.
I think you might have read my response to the Wimpole Local Housing Needs Survey, Mr. Freeman. I have Councillor Young, then Councillor Howe.
Yeah, on the policy HN10, I wonder if we could beef up the description of 2, describing housing needs surveys. That may be something in the margins to describe which would be acceptable and which wouldn't be acceptable as surveys.
I'm certainly happy to look at the wording as I've been talking. I've been thinking we need to tweak the wording of it. So yeah, I'm happy to take that away. I think it's a difficult balance in terms of how precise we are, because we don't want to preclude other data sources that might be useful, but equally it's a balance between how much clarity we give. But yes, happy to take an action to look at that.
Yeah, we don't want to sort of back packets of surveys. We want
actual surveys. No. Yes, indeed. Councillor Howe, then Councillor Davey.
And actually, I'm going to go for a quick question, and that is, have you spoken to your equivalents in other councils like Mid Devon that I understand do it the other way? As in, they use the housing register instead of using housing needs surveys. It would be nice to know their thoughts on what they're doing and how they're getting on with it.
I haven't spoken to them directly, but a colleague in housing pointed out their supplementary planning document on affordable housing, and that it does refer to the use specifically actually of Devon Home Choice data to inform rural exception sites. Even colleagues in housing don't like that, the Mid-Devon approach, and suggest that needs changing. I think the slight difficulty is the Devon home choice data is slightly different in different councils as well, in terms of who can register and in what circumstances and things. So there are local differences between the data that's held. But yeah, we can look into that in a bit more detail between now and sort of finalising the wording of that policy and bringing that back to you.
Councillor Davey.
Thank you. Number 1 in policy HN10 says that rural exception sites are physically well related to the built form of the host settlement. So is the assumption therefore that they are in some kind of settlement, and will that settlement be subject to any kind of sustainability criteria, or is the definition of a rural exception site that we are forgetting about sustainability because of what they are delivering?
I think when we established the rural exception sites policy in the now adopted local plan, it kind of groups settlements in terms of need, and then sets out that the exception site should be at the most sustainable settlement within those grouped settlements, to ensure that it's in the most sustainable place possible, but is still meeting the needs of people within that locality. I think since then, rural exception sites have gone from something that we and a number of other districts were promoting through their plans, but didn't really have very much in terms of government policy behind them, to being something that's quite explicitly clear now in government policy, and is quite a bit more open, I think, to the locality and where they can come forward. So I don't think they need to be linked to a settlement that's in our settlement hierarchy any longer in terms of government policy. But obviously, you raise a good point in terms of ensuring that they are coming forward in the most sustainable locations, which is perhaps something we need to look at as some kind of criteria, so that you in a parish that's got a village that's a tier 4 settlement, and the site's coming forward in a hamlet outside of that, so that there's a process where we can challenge that and say, well, are there no more suitable sites in a more sustainable location at the tier 4 settlement that's in the parish? I don't know, I'm interested to hear members' views on that.
Well,
that would be an
bearing in
option.
mind the conversation earlier, do we just need to bear in mind, though, that actually we probably want to see rural exception sites coming forwards at sites that wouldn't necessarily be in that settlement hierarchy, because fundamentally there will be people in those settlements who have an affordable housing need that needs to be, for whatever reason, in that location. So
yeah, so sites would still be able to come forward through those other routes that we mentioned earlier, as well as potentially a rural exception site.
My point is just, we don't want to, say you can only have a rural exception site if the village has 6 or more services, or whatever it may be, because then we get back to exactly the same problems that we were discussing earlier.
Well, except that as an exception site, it would be outside of the settlement boundary anyway, otherwise it wouldn't be an exception.
Yes.
So yeah, it's how we work that in terms of. I mean, I'm open to members' views, but it may be that maybe you don't want to restrict it in that way, and you're happy for rural exception sites to come forward attached to a hamlet that's not got a settlement boundary and hasn't got services and facilities, in order to facilitate the delivery of affordable housing in those locations.
I'm interested to hear what others think. I think there's probably a happy middle ground between saying we need to be thinking about, how sustainable is it to just plonk rural exception sites anywhere, and actually, to some extent, we need to be able to plonk rural exception sites anywhere. I'm using technical language here, obviously, to be able to meet those needs.
Yeah, I was envisaging some kind of sequential approach that looks at, you start off at the most sustainable settlement within the parish that could meet the need, and then cascade down if there are no suitable sites available or coming forward. But I'm very much thinking off the top of my head. So happy to take it away and give it some further consideration if that's what members think is needed.
Is it worth saying, members, that we'd like that point to be looked at? Yeah. Okay. I think Mr. Freeman can take that as an action then. My list has gone somewhat haywire, but some combination of Councillors Young and Howe need to speak next. Councillor Young.
Yeah, no, I would think with some small communities, if they can demonstrate a justification for 5, 6 houses, then that would give us the confidence that we would support it at a planning application stage. But how we get that justification, no, who would provide that justification? It might not be a parish, it might be just that community. So it's but somehow we need some justification. Now, we can't just have Tom, Dick or Harry tell us, but we need the community to tell us, or the people that represent that small community.
There's got to be some evidence, but it needs to be flexible. What evidence and what the criteria are and whatever. I think Mr. Freeman's as clear as we can be on that. Councillor Howe.
Picking up the same point, actually, I agree with Mr. Freeman's way forward, shall we say, but I'm taking it the other way. It's not about the small settlements. I'm sitting here looking at the list of settlements that are sustainable, that we're putting built-up area boundaries on, vast amounts of housing. You know, whatever number is, it doesn't make any difference. We're having to put that vast amount of housing in. And then we've got an exception site that says, oh, let's have the next field because it's outside the boundary, but there's still a housing need because there always will be. So those settlements are going to get even more than, it makes no sense. An exception site should be that for that reason. And we need to get our countryside alive and keeping alive. And that's the problem at present. We're casting most of our countryside to death now, because there'll be no development, no nothing. I know that's not quite the case, but that's the exaggeration. Anyway, thank you.
I think Councillor Jeffrey's small army of Class Q developments might have something to say about that. But there we go. Okay, are there any other issues to bring up in relation to this chapter? No? Okay, in which case I'll move from the chair then. I need to find the wording for the recommendation that we endorse the revised chapter subject to amendments being made to reflect the discussion at committee. You happy with that, Damien? Okay. In which case then, all those in favour, please. That's unanimous. Which brings us then to chapter 9. Mr. Freeman.
Yes, thank you, Jess. So this chapter is basically the economy chapter. It's called Supporting Jobs and Economy in Vibrant Town Centres, and covers the employment allocations and outside of the West End, which has a separate chapter, and policies around retaining retail areas, town centre functions, as well as things like farm diversification policy, which is one of the things that's been amended within the plan. So you've got a list of the main key changes at paragraph 4.3. We've also modified the approach a bit in terms of employment and skills statements on major developments, which is about securing investment in skills and training as part of those sites coming forward. And there's been some other tweaks as well in relation to local shops and rural shops. Yeah, it's not substantially changed, but a few tweaks here and there through the chapter that you may want to comment on as we move forward. Thank you.
Councillor Howe?
Just as a verification, obviously I own a shop in a Tier 4 settlement. I just want to check that I don't have to declare an interest. I'm making it blatant and clear. I don't think I'm affected any more than any other retail establishment or anything else, if you get my meaning, but I just wanted Damien's thoughts.
Do you want to repeat?
Yeah, I'll repeat that, shall I? I own a convenience store in a Tier 4 settlement that is kind of entangled in all this. We are in a Tier 4 settlement, my village. And my belief is I'm not being affected any more than any other settlements or anything else. I'm just checking my declaration is okay, as in I don't have one really.
I mean, at the end of the day, it's your decision to make as to whether or not you feel that you're any different to anybody else in that regard, and if it'll affect you more than it'll affect everybody else. If you're of the view that it won't, then I don't believe that there's anything to declare. Yep.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Howell. Mr. Hunter, questions on this paper? No? Okay, comments on this chapter? Councillor Ingham.
I'm still concerned, Chair, that we don't do enough to support our expanding communities with population growth. It's really important, I believe, that we encourage younger people as well as older people to come and live in East Devon, and that's how we're going to change the wealth and aspirations of this community by, you know, expanding and encouraging to the nth degree expansion of the Science Park, Sky Park, the likes, and across the board, blue collar as well as white collar jobs in East Devon. And if we spent not that much time, spent as much time on developing that as we do on housing land supply, I will assure you we'll be one of the most affluent districts within the UK, because very few districts do that, other than the huge conurbations or cities, if you want to call them that. And I think it's a great shame, because we really do have brilliant opportunities in East Devon, let alone Southwest, to do so. And we look at how we support small shops, which are all the right things, and tourism within the area. But we have to recognise that careers within tourism, if you're an employee, or careers supporting the ageing community, do not pay very well. And that's why it's so important that we make the very most of expanding Sky Park and the Science Park at a rapid rate, and the same with Exmouth as well. And I don't think we're addressing the opportunities that are in front of us as much as we should be, or could be. Thank you, Chair.
Yes, thank you, Chair. And just to reassure Councillor Ingham, and it's perhaps unfortunate the phasing of the chapters coming forward, but there is a separate chapter on the west end of East Devon which covers expansion of Science Park and Sky Park and picks up on a lot of those issues. And we do recognise that obviously the enterprise zone has been instrumental in sort of bringing in those skills and those higher paid jobs and skills and training that sits behind that into the district, and it's important that we support the continued growth of that. And I think it's a lot of it's the developments that have taken place in that part of the district which has started to turn around, as you mentioned earlier, that shift between the disparity between house prices and earnings, with average earnings increasing in the district as a result of that, and starting to close that gap, and we need to continue to do that. And those are all in the West End chapter of the plan, which in hindsight would have been better to have brought alongside this chapter so you could see that package together. But unfortunately, the phasing of the work streams has meant that's not been possible. I would, however, draw attention to policy SEO 5, employment and skills statements, which is trying to bring into play within those major developments, which would be across the whole of the district, that skills approach of training both sort of construction skills, but blue and white collar work, as you put it, on all of those sites to try and get the maximum benefit from those developments coming forward in our communities, so that they can be training young people, provide employment for young people on those sites as well. And where they're bringing forward employment developments, how that's then brought forward in the use of those developments in the future as well. So trying to make sure we're maximising that, and that policy has been developed through our economic development team, and is part of a wider framework that other authorities in the Southwest are using as well. So we hope that will really help to develop training and skills opportunities on development sites and new developments coming forward in the district.
Councillor Young.
Thank you, Chair. Looking at policy SE03, farm diversification. To support farms that are looking at extending their existing farm operations, such as producing cheese. Now they're a dairy farm and they want to produce cheese, and it would be good to encourage those sort of industries. I did see a programme the other night. A farm who grew potatoes is now a large manufacturer of crisps, which looked very tasty. Now we also need to be careful that it doesn't become a dirty gravy crisp factory. So can we look at that to see if we can encourage homegrown farm operations that are extending from agriculture, and see if we can add to that policy SE03.
I'm actually just reading through the policy and thinking how it would fit if someone wanted to do that example, and you manufacture cheese on a dairy farm, or crisps on a farm producing potatoes. I think the way it's drafted is quite broad deliberately, because farm diversification could mean all sorts of different things. So I think it would fit within that policy. I think it would then come down to the criteria in terms of the scale and the impacts of that, which is, as you say, we wouldn't want it to turn into, Walker's Southwest, but necessarily. It's I think it would fall within the scope of that policy, and provided it's appropriate scale and opportunities to reuse existing buildings are prioritised and things like that. I think that's something that would be supported by the policy as it's drafted.
Any other comments from within committee then? Councillor Ingham, something to add?
Yes, on that policy, Chair, sometimes, especially over the last 10 years, we've encouraged farm diversification. And I think Councillor Collins will probably agree with this, that there is concern that some landowners of farms, perhaps when they diversify, they ought to consider farming as an option, because they've diversified so much. You think, as custodians of the land, they're not doing. Now, obviously, the whole point of this is to make farming within our community sustainable for families and for generations. But we mustn't have our system abused by those people who decide to make a fast buck in a 5-10 year period, and make farming impossible on some farms as a result of how they've diversified. And we must bear that in mind. I don't know whether Mr. Freeman wants to comment. How can we do that to ensure that we're maintaining our roots need for supporting farming in the countryside as a primary option, and everything else is secondary to that.
There is some wording in SE03 there. Does it just need to be beefed up, Mr. Freeman?
We can certainly look at that. I mean, except it is a challenge because generally these things happen incrementally over a number of years, and it's difficult to decide sort of where do you draw the line and sort of say enough is enough. You know, you've diversified too much. As Chair says, I think the third bullet point down in policy SEO3 says development in terms of its scale, nature, location and layout does not detract from or prejudice the existing agricultural undertaking or its future operation. Perhaps we need to beef the wording up to say something that takes account of the cumulative impact, because it's not just the development that might be for us at that point in time, but it might be, does it cumulatively with previous developments for diversification that we may already have granted mean that we've strayed too far, as it were, from the agricultural operations and the scale and nature has changed. Happy to take away an action to look at that and how we can beef that up.
The other wording I highlight in there in the introduction to that policy, the third and fourth lines there, ensuring the development supports the long-term financial sustainability of the farm holding. You could probably make an argument that doing anything in a planning application on a farm would support that one way or another. But I think, yeah, take that point away and let's look at what we can do to beef that one up. Councillor Davey.
I'm looking at policy SEO9, rural shops on page 190. And I understand the intention here, and criterion A, a minimum of 50% of the produce or products for sale being produced on the premises or holding, that seems reasonable to me. But the second one, the majority of the remaining produce products for sale being sourced and produced from within a 10-mile radius of the business, I do wonder if that's a little restrictive. If I have a farm shop that, for instance, taking Councillor Young's cheese maker, they might produce their own cheese, but they might also decide to specialise in cheese, and so they want to bring in cheese from a bigger area. They wouldn't even, under this criterion, be able to stock, say, some Cornish Yarg or Devon Blue because they're produced too far away. And I do wonder if a 10-mile radius is limiting that shop to, well, not very much, unless the farm down the road is also producing cheese and they get together. But I do wonder if that's a bit restrictive. And maybe I could just ask what the intention of that is and why it's so restrictive.
I think on a point of correction, it was Councillor Young's crisp maker rather than cheese maker. It was Mr. Freeman's cheese maker. Mr. Freeman, can you clarify that, please?
Yes, I mean, I think in the past we've had policies that required a higher percentage of products to be produced on the holding and then had a smaller percentage that could have been produced from anywhere, basically. And the result of that is we've ended up with some farm shops that, you know, are selling goods that are available in your local supermarket that are produced internationally and all of this, which wasn't particularly the intention. So I suppose the intent here was to try and be sort of nailed that down a bit more to maximise that it's from a local market and locally produced, but also acknowledging the growth in the food and drink production and market in the district that has blossomed a lot in recent years, and that there are a lot more people producing food and drink and other products within the district, and wanting to maximise the economic benefit of that by any outlets going forward needing to support those businesses and keep the economic benefit as much as possible within the local area. Whether or not we've got the percentages right is questionable, and whether or not you still want to have a percentage that can be produced outside. I think the way it's worded does allow for some produce outside of that area, because it's saying the majority of the remaining products to be sourced and produced from within a 10-mile radius of the business. So there is a little bit of flex in there, but I think we were deliberately trying to make that tighter to maximise the local benefit for our local producers, really.
Does it need to be something like a minimum of 2/3 from on the premises or within 10 miles, and then the rest could be from somewhere else? I'm just plucking figures out the air, but
I think that illustrates the problem is, how do you evidence what thresholds you have? There is a little bit of plucking figures out of the air and what looks reasonable. So yes, I mean, I'm interested to hear others' views on what is an appropriate percentage, but I think the intent was to try and give greater flexibility, but keep the benefit within the district as much as possible, but possibly a higher percentage from the holding.
Councillor Fernley.
Thank you, Chair. If you use this 10-mile radius, then a farm shop that's next to where we live in Tithe Barn would mean that you can't sell anything that's produced around Honiton, because that's 14 miles away. So it's extremely narrow. I mean, something you could sell in East Devon, but then that doesn't work because there's just something over the border in Somerset. Yeah, I appreciate it's tricky to come up with an area, and I'm all for sustainability and not carrying things for miles, but there has to be a better way.
Do we need to say in the district?
I'm always mindful that we're probably the only ones that care about the administrative boundaries, and in the district doesn't necessarily mean anything to a lot of people. I mean, I'm happy to take it away and have a look at it. I mean, maybe the solution is a percentage from within a 10-mile radius, and then another percentage that's perhaps within the county or something, as a way around that.
Yeah, no, not Cornish. No. Agreed, Councillor Ingham. Can I suggest, rather than getting bogged down in debates between arbitrary numbers, that we ask Mr. Freeman to maybe take this one away and look at it? Conscious that Councillor Howe has to leave.
It was a very quick. It's the writing. The majority of the remaining products for sale being produced within 10 miles. So to do that, all they need to do is 50% from on farm, 26% from within 10 miles. Then they've got 24% they can source anywhere. That's the wording in front of you. So just to be clear, no one's limiting, what anything else. So I actually think it's too low. I think there should be a Devon or a UK or something to keep it British or whatever else for the remainder. But that's, as I say, at present, they've got 24% they can buy from anywhere. And I think that's probably wrong, but that's another matter. Anyway, I've got to go.
Thank you, Councillor Howe. Councillor Young.
Yeah, I'm just thinking of the challenge of the planning team having to go and pick up all these pots and packets of cheese to find out where they actually come from. I'm just wondering if there's an easier way of confining the expansion of farm shops to a specific size, that they can't be more than X square meters, so we don't end up with massive big farm shops like we have done with recently, and also now looking at some of these garden centres. They sell everything, including Father Christmas. So now, how that can be justified as gardening, but some sort of say 3,000 square foot would be quite a large store.
I thought you were going to say they sell everything from crisps to cheese for a minute, Jeff. I think Mr. Freeman's probably heard the comments and can take that away and look in the round at what we bring back to the Regulation 19. But he wants to say something, so Ed.
Well, yes, happy to take it away and happy to take on board that point. I mean, I think what rather than a floor area, I think it could say something like the farm shop shall be commensurate to the size of the holding that it serves, or something like that, to give some flex, but still cover off the issue of disproportionately large farm shops.
Okay, any comments on other issues in this chapter? Councillor Ingham.
Unless that enhances the sustainability of small hamlets, Chairman. So.
I'm not coming outside committee. I'm sorry, folks.
Is there any time when you go outside committee?
Yes, public speaking or right at the start of the items, but we're right in the middle of the debate.
There was a start. You never offered at the start. You went straight to Ben.
You didn't stick your hand up. Ben had a question in questions, and any other points on this chapter? Okay, in that case then, I'll move the same thing that I did earlier, that I'm not going to repeat. All those in favour, please? Yeah, that's unanimous. Okay, which brings us to the final chapter for today, chapter 15, our outstanding historic environment, with a lovely picture of Broad Henbury on the front. Mr. Freeman.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so this is a relatively short chapter, obviously addressing historic environments, so listed building conservation areas, registered parks and gardens, archaeological remains, etc. It hasn't fundamentally changed from what the committee saw previously in terms of the draft plan. Obviously, much of this is fairly established in existing policies that seek to protect the same historic assets within the district. So yeah, there's not a great deal to say really. It's just a slightly updated interpretation of the issues that need to be addressed in terms of heritage assets, and an update on the adopted local plan and the previous draft that members would have previously seen. But welcome any comments.
Members, any questions? Outside committee, any questions? No? Okay. Any comments from inside committee, or are we happy with this as it's written? Okay, I'll propose from the chair then that we're happy with this as it's written. Thank you, Mr. Freeman. All those in favour, please. Thank you very much. That brings us then, I think, to the end for today. Thank you very much, members. See you next Tuesday, which will be at 9 o'clock. And apologies for the confusion about the start time today.